16th in the series of Coffee with the Bar. The Madras High Court has been the cradle of very many lawyers, some of whom have been outstanding. Apart from being the birthplace of brilliant lawyers, the Madras Bar has contributed freedom fighters, social reformers, philanthropists, dramatists, musicians, and people in the creative arts, and above all, some thorough gentlemen as well. All of them had various facets in common, and some of them had certain qualities which were totally at variance with everybody else on this planet. All of them, many of them had odd habits, they had quirks, but all of it contributed to the rich personality that all of them brought to the Madras High Court. This session is not to glorify them, but to highlight their specific interests, their sense of humor, their ethics, their court craft, and if possible, to a certain extent, their oddities and eccentricities. The list of people that we are going to talk about today is not obviously exhaustive. It is only an illustrative list. And therefore, we have today a session where 5 gentlemen who are renowned in their field now are going to be talking about S. Govind Swaminadhan, G. Ramaswamy, Habibullah Badsha, Vedantham Srinivasan, and V S Subramanyan. Now, as far as these 5 gentlemen are concerned, I have not had the pleasure of interacting with Govind Swaminathan and G. Ramaswamy. I have just met them, seen them a few times. But the impression of Govind Swaminathan that stands in my mind was something that was narrated to a small group at a private function by Sriram Panchu. I believe Govind Swaminathan, who used to be called boss by his entire juniors and probably the chamber, had an old lady for a client, and the lady was not only old, she was not very financially well off, due to which there was no money even for the expenses, leave alone fees. So Govind Swaminathan went on representing her for years to come. And at some point of time, the obvious question came from one of his juniors as to, in the absence of fees, why are we doing this, boss? And Govind Swaminathan turned around to the junior and said, because it's the right thing to do. That was the character of the man. And to tell us more about the character of the man, before we move on to the other wonderful and colorful personalities, we have Mr. L Rajah, senior advocate, who was attached to Mr. Govind Swaminathan in more ways than one. Mr. Rajah.
Good evening, friends. I should first thank Sriram for giving me this opportunity to pay homage to a person whom I deeply revere, love, and respect. I should enter a caveat here that there are more people in my chambers who have possibly spent longer time with him and possibly know him better. The few names that come to my mind are Mr. V. Vibhishnan, Mr. M. Subramanyan, Mr. I. Subramanyan, Mr. Sriram Panchu, and Mr. Anbumani, who possibly was closest to him during the years that I had known Mr. Govind Swaminathan. Interestingly, when I joined the bar, and I joined as a junior, he had completed 50 years at the bar, or was rather completing 50 years at the bar, and therefore his experience at the bar was more than twice my age. That is the stage at which I entered his life. But it was a very fortunate and a remarkable experience for me that I was able to be with him. But as I said, in the 20 years that I had the fortune of being associated with him, it was one of the greatest learning experiences that anybody could hope for in this profession. So what was remarkable about Mr. Govind Swaminathan? In the first place, what was remarkable about him was his background. His father, Dr. Swaminathan, came from a very impoverished family from Palghat, who hardly afford to educate himself. But still, against greatest of odds, he completed his law. He went to England and qualified as a barrister. From England, he traveled to the US and it was one of the first doctorates of the Harvard University. He came back and set up a resounding practice in criminal law and married Amu Swaminathan, who also happened to be a remarkable person. She was an elected member of parliament. She was a member of the Constitution Working Committee. She is a signatory to the Constitution of India and a remarkable woman in her own right. And then his sister, Dr. Lakshmi Segan, who was again one of the first women doctors from the Madras University, then went on to head the Rani Jhansi regiment in Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army, the INA, and then contested against Abdul Kalam for the post of the President of India. Once again, I was fortunate to spend time with her because Mr. Swaminathan asked me to help her in a rent control matter she was doing. And unfortunately, she was trying to get a tenant out and had to suffer a long, protracted litigation, and therefore I had interacted with her. A most remarkable person and a great sense of humor and an utter joyful experience to be with her. And then he had his other sister, Dr. Mrinalini Sarabhai, who in her own right was a most renowned dancer. She was giving dance performances at the age of 80. And she was the wife of Mr. Vikram Sarabhai, the top scientist, space scientist of India. And then his brother, Subram, whom they called Sats, who was well known in the corporate field. So his entire background in the first place was absolutely remarkable. And therefore, it is not a surprise that from that environment, this great man came to be. It is Rudyard Kipling who said, "The East is East and West is West, and never shall the twain meet." If I had had an opportunity to meet Rudyard Kipling, I would have told him that he was wrong, because it was in the person of Mr. Swaminathan that the best of East and the best of West met. And he was a combination of the best in these cultures, in the beliefs, in the faith, in the manner of living of the East and the West. So what is it, what were these qualities that I am talking about? If you were to take his Eastern, if you were to take his proclivities towards the Eastern culture, I would say the following. First is simplicity. He was an extremely simple person. I don't know how many of you know that, notwithstanding the fact that he was one of the top lawyers of the country, he never owned a property anywhere except an extent of about 2 acres, which he actually purchased only to save a friend of his in the Madras Race Club from some difficulty he was in. That large house that he was living in was all acquired by his father, and after his death it came to his mother, and he left very strict instructions that none of his generation wanted any part of that property. It all went directly to the grandsons of Dr. Swaminathan and Amu Swaminathan, without women being excluded. So he practiced this women's right to property much before it came into existence, and one of the most simplest resources that you can ever see in terms of lifestyle. No desire to ride in a costly car, no desire to flash, expensive pens or to dress in any flashy manner. And I have never seen him with more than 100 rupees in his pocket. He used to go to Mrs. Pereira, his secretary, and take another 200 rupees when we went for a haircut to be given to the barber. That is all he carried with him, and I have never seen any person with such endearing simplicity. So that is the first quality that comes to mind, is absolute simplicity, which I would say is a part of his, of the eastern part of his character. And then, secondly, his love and affection for his family. He was essentially a family man. And his love and affection for his family was something remarkable. And when I say family, it included all his juniors, his extended family, as we were called, anybody who came into contact with him, and anybody who were good enough or fortunate enough to be associated with him. Some of the instances that come to mind was when Mr. Panju unfortunately contracted polio. He went on a trekking to the Himalayas and was bedridden for almost 6 months. Every day after court, after leaving the High Court, he would travel to meet Panchu and to visit him at St. Mary's Road, spend some time with him, 10 to 15 minutes, and then go to his house in Chetpet. That is the type of involvement that he had with all of us. It is very interesting that he was arguing a case before Justice Nayanar Sundaram. And as usual, when he argues a case, all of us will keep pestering him with all facts and some brilliant legal points which will all surface in our minds just at that point of time. And he will patiently, listen to all of us and then tell the court what he would think was important in the matter. So he had a great knack for that. And Mr. Nayanar Sundaram was watching this in a very amused way. And then he told Mr. Swaminathan, the problem with you is you have too many juniors. And then Pat came, Mr. Swaminathan's reply, my lord, with my juniors I am confused, but without my juniors I am lost. So that was the type of love and affection that he had for all of us, which is I would say, a very Eastern quality that he had. The third aspect that I must mention is his complete detachment. If the Bhagavad Gita were to talk about the Karma Yogi, and if that Karma Yogi were to be personified, the personification of that concept of Karma Yogi was Mr. Govind. Because even today, I am trying to inculcate that entire detachment that he had towards whatever he did. And, I was briefing him in a matter, and we were doing a matter before Justice Chandrukar, a writ appeal, which is a very complicated case, and we had lost before the single judge. And then it went on for days, and ultimately we won the case. So with great joy, I rushed back to the chamber and told him, boss, that appeal the appeal has been allowed. And then he said, yes. Is that good or bad? Did we appear for the appellant or the respondent? So by that time, he had even forgotten whether we had appeared for the appellant or the respondent. That is what, even today, I am trying to sort of inculcate a complete detachment after the case is over, which is very difficult for many of us to sort of cultivate, but he was an embodiment of that. And it is a true, tribute to his sense of detachment that even I was with him when his wife passed away. I have seen him when the news that his brother passed away was conveyed to him. He took it all in his stride. A woman who had been with him for so many decades in his life and whom he was so extremely fond of, and his brother and sisters whom he was extremely fond of, even the news that they passed away did not affect him. That is the level of detachment that he had reached, which is again a remarkable quality. And then there was this complete surrender to a superior force. He was not a very religious person in the sense that he was not given to any great rituals. And if you actually took him and made him stand before an idol of a god, he wouldn't even know what to do. That is the level of religiosity he had. But he was extremely spiritual. In the famous Archaka case, which he was arguing against Nani Palkhiwala in the Supreme Court, Mr. Parasaran was instructing Mr. Palkhiwala, and the instructions for Mr. Parasaran came directly from the Paramacharya of Kanjipuram. And when he was arguing this case, Mr. Parasaran was very, intrigued to know that he had his hand in his right pocket right through the proceedings. He never took that hand out of his right pockets, and even when juniors were handing over papers to him to be passed on to the bench or case laws to be passed on to the bench, he would receive it in his left hand and would pass it on to the bench. And Mr. Parasaran, after that matter was over, asked him, sir, how is it that you are receiving everything with your left hand? What is there in your pocket? Then he slowly took out a picture of Ganesha and Lakshmi, which his mother had presented to him on his wedding day. And he said, you see, I am arguing a matter. I am not very well conversant with all these practices. I prayed that I should not, even unwittingly mislead the court on any of these important issues that I am placing before the court. That was the type of, basic reverence that he had in other people's belief and other people's faith. And in another case, which Mr. Parasaran, Mr. Parasaran has actually mentioned this in the book that we brought out in memory of Mr. Swaminadhan, is a case where in the matrimonial case, there is a missionary, there is a nun who was put in the box to lead evidence on the character of whatever that person did when the person was in school. And that was one of the most important evidence. At least Mr. Parasan thought that was the most important evidence in the case. And when the opportunity came for Mr. Swaminathan to cross-examine the witness, he stood up and said that I have no questions to ask. And after the matter that evening, Mr. Parasan asked him, sir, but this is my most important witness. Why did you not cross-examine her? He said, she is a person of God. I don't think she will die. I do not want to put her to any embarrassment. I will still win the case for other points which he did. So this is his reverence for things that were spiritual and connected to faith, even though he himself did not know anything related to the rituals or anything very learned about the faiths that he practiced. So all that I would say is the Eastern culture that made him what he was. Now let us come to the Western culture. So what made him Western? His punctuality and etiquette, right? His punctuality was remarkable. I mean, if something had to start at a particular time, he would be there 5 minutes before that. In fact, many times I have driven him. I had been a driver and had taken him to various functions that he was officiating or was delivering a speech. And we always used to arrive 10 minutes early, and we found the hall completely deserted. So it is only after that the other participants would, saunter into the proceedings. And I have asked him, sir, do you find this strange? He told me, you see, I've been a punctual man all my life, and let me tell you, a punctual person is always a lonely person. So it was like that. I mean, you could set your clock to the activities. 5 o'clock, the gates of Gilchrist Garden would open, his car would roll out, he would go for his riding. 7 o'clock, he would be at his desk, prepared, reading the cases for the day. By about 9:50, we would all leave his house. We will arrive at the High Court. 4:50, we would all leave the High Court. We will come back home. You could set your clock by his activities, and he would retire to bed at 8:30. And the world was close to him after that. One interesting incident was a friend of his met him at Spencer's, and they were both talking for some time. And then Mr. Swaminathan, that friend told Mr. Swaminathan, after a few minutes, told the friend, now listen, chap, next time you come to Madras, you're going to be staying with me. And that friend was a little dumbfounded. He said, but Govind, even this time I'm staying with you. So he hardly knew what was happening in the rest of that large house. And so long as he was allowed to stick to his habits, he would stick to them without completely dedicated to his commitment to punctuality. And then he was, his convictions and values were so strong. The famous poet W.B. Yeats said that we live in times where the wife lack all conviction and the verse are full of passionate intensity. Thankfully, Mr. Swaminathan was an exception to that, because he was a wise and good person with a lot of conviction. And this is what actually possibly led to his taking a very firm stand in a matter in which he was convicted of contempt, and ultimately the Supreme Court set aside that matter. But one remarkable thing about Mr. Swaminathan is, in his entire career, I don't think he ever had a thought that if I did this, what would be its consequence to my career, my standing in the profession, my fortunes, my family. Never. If something was right, it had to be done, full stop. There is no further thought that had to be applied to that issue at all. So we are glad that we had a person of such strong conviction and values, and we hope in some small measure at least we juniors have inherited that. And then was a well-rounded personality. Now today, if you apply to the Western universities, they don't care about what marks you get. It is what type of a well-rounded personality you are that matters in all Western universities. And Mr. Swaminathan was emblematic of that. Yeah, he was emblematic of the fact that a person could be such a well-rounded personality and have interest in so many different things and still do well in all of them. He was an excellent cricketer. He was a left-arm spinner. He played for a club called the Vidarbha Club. His interest in cricket led him to be the commentator in the All India Radio for cricket matches. He was excellent, as everybody knows, on the back of a horse. He was excellent at golf. He acted in plays for Madras players. He was a member and led the Home Guards, an institution. Was the president of Balamandir for a long time. With Shivaji Ganesan, he was member of the Camp Nakela, which encouraged the Scouts, Boy Scouts movement in Tamil Nadu. So it was such a wonderful personality with such varied interest, and this well-rounded personality is once again indicative of the Western culture which he adopted. So I don't want to go on for long because if you ask me to talk about my boss, I keep talking endlessly. But there are others waiting to talk about other eminent gentlemen. So with this, I will stop and possibly will continue at the second and subsequent. Thank you, Srinath.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was quite an insight into the man that Govind Swaminathan actually was, though in brief. Now, before we move on to the next speaker and the next subject, there is one thing that has been said about Mr. Govind Swaminathan, and that is his stint as Crown Prosecutor. During his stint as Crown Prosecutor or as the Advocate General, he was always known to conceal the matter, which is a concept which is, in simple words, absent today. Okay, so we're talking about this element called fairness. Fairness and conviction and the courage to admit that the state is wrong. So have you personally seen any instance of this when you were with him?
As I said that, when I joined him, he was neither a Crown Prosecutor nor an Advocate General. But I remember that during one of the functions that we had to felicitate Mr. Swaminathan after he completed 50 years at the bar, and when he received actually the living legend of the law from the International Bar Association, Mr. N.C. Raghavachari mentioned this instance where he was appearing in an appeal against a conviction, and the matter was posted before a bench, and Mr. Raghavachari, N.C. Raghavachari stood up to argue the matter, and then Mr. Govind Swaminathan stood up and started saying something. And Mr. Raghavachari said, this is very unfair of the public prosecutor, or the Crown Prosecutor. It is my turn to speak and he should not be addressing the court. So Mr. Swaminathan told him, just wait for a few minutes and listen to what I have to say. And then he told the court, this is a case where the conviction must be set aside. These are the points on which the findings of the lower court are faulty. And I think this is a matter where the conviction must be set aside, and sat down. And Mr. Raghavachari was deeply obliged to him for that, and therefore the conviction was set aside without a word being uttered by the appellant. So I think there are any number of cases like this where you will look at the merits of the matter and be guided by that rather than on any other issue.
Okay, thank you. The next person, since we parted with L Rajah on the question of fairness, we now come to a person for whom all was fair in love and war, and that was this gentleman who went from Madras to New Delhi, and that was G. Ramaswamy. It was not to say that he was not fair, but for him, not only was the court playground, it was also a battleground where considering his remarkable reputation for that is the photograph of G. Ramaswamy. I understand that it was at the time of GR Junior's enrollment, which must make it around 1983. And anyway, coming back to GR, literally a bottomless vessel of anecdotes and one-liners and repartees and jokes. And the ultimate aim of all this was to keep everybody in good humor and benefit to his client. I have not had interaction with GR Senior at all. I have just seen him in 1993-94 when he came before the bench consisting of M. Srinivasan and S Subramanyan, if I remember right, for some matter. Other than that, I have not seen him at all. But to tell us more about GR, comes another GR. To speak about one humorist, comes another humorist, and before GR Junior starts, I must say something and probably ask GR Junior whether that is the truth as well, because this was informed to me by Kuberan advocate. I believe when GR Junior was walking towards the Bar Association, maybe around 15, 20 years ago, there was this gentleman from the Bar Association who was walking probably towards Muthuswami Iyer's cellar. And that gentleman put out his hand to GR Junior and said, I am GS Thambi. So GR Junior said, I am also GS Thambi. So with that kind of humor being available in GR Junior, sir, your impression, your views, and your take on GR Senior, your senior as well as your guru.
My dear friend, Ramaswami, the rare species. Very difficult. I don't think anybody you can compare him with seriously. Anyway, considering his background, family background.
You have to come a bit forward. You're not audible. Yeah. Yeah.
He is the third generation lawyer. The first person in the family, I mean, my grandfather, he is my Ramaswami, of course, should we know, is my elder brother. My guru is also like my father, because I lost my father when I was 4 years old and he only brought me up. And G. Subramanyan was mainly responsible for what I am today now. So my grandfather, G.R. Kalyanasundramaya, was enrolled in 1894. He was junior under his first cousin. Of course, we are not taking that into consideration. He was mainly a palace lawyer. He was appearing for junior princess in Tanjavur Palace. And this Tanjavur district court was in Kumbakonam till 1907. And later on, it shifted to Tanjavur. And he practiced till 1936. And in the meanwhile, my father, K. Ganeshayar, also became a lawyer in 1926. Mr. G. Ramaswamy became enrolled in 1951. And his life can be essentially split into four. 1951 to 1959, he was practicing in Tanjore. Then 1959 to 86 in Madras, and 86 to 99 in Delhi. This is essentially 3 periods. But at the time of enrollment, he had various advantages. And for civil, he was junior under my father, K. Ganeshayar, who had almost appearing in every case on one side. And he was interested in taking up criminal matters. Therefore, he became junior under Mr. Gopalan, uncle of B. Kumar. He was a leading criminal lawyer at that time. So he was practicing in civil side as well as criminal side. When he became lawyer, my father spent 1,000 rupees and bought him a car, small car in those days. So he used to get into the car and he liked traveling. He used to, morning 4 o'clock, he'll get into the car, he'll start sleeping. Then he'll go to the entire Tanjavur district, conduct various cases, come back to Tanjavur in the night. Likewise, right from his beginning stages, he was only traveling and he was very thorough in criminal matters. And there is, in criminal matters, there is one anecdote about him. He was appearing in one murder case. In those days, before 1980, all of you know that only most of the cases, the death sentence was given, now only rarest of rare cases. So one client asked him, he was given death sentence. So the client asked him, Enna Sami, Neenga Hajaraye, Thooku Dandana Kudututaangala. And he immediately said, Na Hajaranadnala avana thookoda vittaanga. So he was like that. He was so he was very thorough in basic criminal law. He is also very thorough in basic civil law. And one more advantage he had is he became an expert in transport law, even in Tanjore. He had the transport law. He learned because there is a transport corporation, Tanjore, SMT Motors. SMT Motors, and now all of us know T.N. Ramachandran, who is a leading lawyer and also known as Dekra Adipudi. He was very closely associated with him for all these matters. I mean, so he was practically thorough in all matters. So in 1959, when I was born in December, at that time, the family decided, by the time G. Subramanyan has already become a lawyer in 1956, they decided why not all the need not practice in Tanjavur. So he can shift to Madras. And one more reason why he shifted to Madras was C.R. Jagadish Iyer was the leading lawyer at that time, who was taking care of our office matters. He was elevated as that. Therefore, because of the elevation of C.R. Jagadish Iyer, he shifted to Madras in 1959. From that time, our family is practicing in Madras. 1959. Then 1967 became additional government pleader civil. Parallelly, was also public prosecutor for central government. So therefore, you can know, unless he is completely thorough of both civil and criminal side, this is not possible. Then 1974, he became a government pleader. Then 1976, he was designated as a senior counsel. From 76 to 86, he was in Chennai. Then there is one more aspect about him. He's very, very thorough in the Commission of Inquiry matters, and he has practically appeared throughout the country in various commissions. So therefore, he was essentially a man. The difference between G. Ramaswamy and G. Subramanyan is, I have to necessarily mention this. G. Ramaswamy is a first principle man. So he always goes first principles. Therefore, it never mattered to him whichever branch he appeared. So G. Subramanyan was essentially a case law oriented lawyer. So he was very, very thorough in his fundamentals, and he can, suppose you go and instruct him in a criminal matter, he will first ask me, whether do you see this privy council judgment in 1932 or 33. Therefore, he was, so this offense, ingredients of the offense, he was very thorough in every side of criminal law. Therefore, a person who started his practice in district municip and magistrate court in Tanjavur came to Madras and ultimately ended up in Supreme Court, became one of the greatest lawyers of the country. So this is as a senior, he is 100% lawyer, no question of other. So he was not bothered about his family. He was rarely, because we used to stand at least 10 feet away from him, because he considered, therefore he was not essentially a family man, but 100% lawyer. Even after 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, even when he's relaxing, he will only talking about his cases, nothing else. So he was 100% lawyer. Then his sense of humor was excellent. His sense of humor was excellent. For example, he was walking in Supreme Court, where N.G.R. Prasad was just crossing him. So he asked N.G.R. Prasad, "Where are you going?" And N.G.R. Prasad said, "No, I am going to bathroom. I want to pass urine." Don't go in Supreme Court, you will get relief only there. So he was, like that. I mean, in corridor, of course, I should not talk about him. Many seniors knows about him. Practically, I practiced under him only for 3 years. And thereafter, he went to, left for Delhi. So he was walking in Madras High Court corridor. Somebody came and asked him, Mr. Counsel, where is CJR Paul's court? So he said, immediately said, CJR Paul, he said, you go there straight, there's a court number 4 is there. You open the door and see. Anga deduction mari vathara ukkandirparu, avar Mr. Justice Paul. So he was like that. Many people actually mistake him, but because he was never serious in anything. But when it comes to cases, he will never give up his case. Of course, the question of fairness, other things, contrary to Mr. Govind Swaminadhan, he is more bothered about the case and success of this client. In fact, G. Ramaswamy and this Govind Swaminathan used to fight heavily in court, because inside the court they don't get along well. Outside the court, so when he was additional government pleader and government pleader, Govind Swaminadhan was an advocate general. So in that sense, they were close, but inside the court, when they are arguing opposite each other, therefore, they take any civil, criminal, company, constitutional law, anything, transport matters. He was thorough in everything. Therefore, and one more aspect is very, very important to him is his devotion to Lord Ganesha. Because our family our family deity is Ganesha, and he was, in fact, the god, the Uchishta Ganapati, he is Uchishta Ganapati Upasaka. He used to come and tell in his ears what he should do in a particular case. Now, he had a peculiar habit of keeping the bundle under his bed whenever he goes to sleep. One day I asked him, why you are doing like that? Important matters, he always keep it below his bed. So he said, that is our family practice. What is the family practice? So when my father was practicing, those days, huge matters, very high stakes involved. So he used to work late till late night. Despite his late night working, he had 15 children. That's a different matter. So he used to sleep and he used to work, and he won't get the point. So then my grandfather, it appears, will come in his dream and said, what, enna nee vela senjirka? Oh, 1931 Privy Council in the page in the pakatla irukku par. Then immediately he'll come down. It's a huge palace-like house. So he used to come down and see that page. It will be there. So my father and grandfather used to communicate like this, even after the death of my grandfather. He used to come and dream and tell him. So he always had that in mind. So whenever there is an important case, he keep the bundle below his bed and sleep to see whether he gets any inspiration. In fact, he had got inspiration. He is a very specialized lawyer at the same time. He is a great devotee of Ganesha, and he always thought that it is Ganesha who is there. So when Kiran Bedi case was going on, so the Kiran Bedi in Delhi, the 1986-87. So the Kiran Bedi was put in box. Everybody knows about this case. And suddenly, when she was about to take oath, his favorite devotee, the deity, Ganesha, came and told in his ear, what are you doing? She is in the position of an accused. Don't ask her to take oath. So immediately he got shocked and said, no, you don't take oath. And he said, no, she is in the position of an accused unless those other witnesses are examined. She should not be examined. And he filed a petition for exemption, and that was rejected. And the history is that ultimately the matter went to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that, interpreting Section 8 of the Act, said she is in the position of an accused, therefore she should not take oath first. First of all, the other person who made a complaint should be examined. Only thereafter her position will come. Therefore, he is not only a professional, but essentially a religious man. Though others may call it as Bodhanambika or something like that. He was not bothered. Most of the time, he will keep a vibhuti in his packet. Other side of his life is different. But he will always keep vibhuti in his packet, and he will take the vibhuti and put it before going to court. So he was a multifaceted person. Of course, he was not interested in music or cricket. Some rarely go and see him. He is 100%. His life is law, law, and law. Nothing more than that. He always tell me that law is a zealous mistress, and you should never lose attention. Maybe that Saturday, Sunday evening you may socialize, but not during working days. He always has. He taught me that every day you should read a Supreme Court judgment, and you'll become an expert in all branches of law. That is another thing. And his interpretation of statutes is excellent. So his teaching is that if you do not understand the section, first you read the section. If you do not understand, then you write the section. The meaning will reveal by itself. And I have worked in several cases with him. And it is very, very easy to instruct him. Only hardly 5 to 10 minutes you have to instruct him. not beyond that. You can't sit with him for 2 hours, 3 hours. He will never agree. He will say, what is the point? Take the relevant page. There ends the matter. In fact, in many cases, from one court to the other, I have instructed him. Many people they say, no, he is not reading the paper, so he is not correct. He can receive instruction in 5 minutes and argue for 10 hours, 15 hours continuously. I have seen that myself. Therefore, of course, the genetics was there. He was a hard worker, and he will take such points which nobody can take. And he will grill his juniors. He was very difficult to handle him in the office, and he will wake me at for 2 o'clock in the night and ask him what happened to this. So he treats everybody equally. His juniors, his children, even his children were afraid of him. In fact, he is popularly known as Ramanna in the family, and 30 years difference between us. And so he is a kind of a person nobody can imitate. And of course, many people criticized him also. He is least bothered, and his client is his master. And for him, he will do anything, and he will completely prepare the case and present it before the court. He won't make concession and say, no, not that. He is my master, and I have to work. And he will do within the 4 corners of law. In fact, so 86 onwards, he was in Supreme Court, and he argued in several matters of constitutional importance. Many of his jokes are classic jokes, and of course, I can't repeat them in this open screen, because he's a very, very rare species according to me, and I owe my position to him. Thank you.
Sir, 1 second, sir. I think A.S. Sriram sir got disconnected. Just give me a minute. He's back already. He's back. He's just joining us. 2 minutes. Sorry for the interruption.
The general hour with Swaminadhan.
Sir, yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I just lost it for a minute here. Thank you. I'm right now on my phone because of the internet connection. So, Ninga, you were under Mr. GR for around 3 years after your enrollment before he left for Delhi?
Yes, 3 years.
Okay. Lot has been said about his presence of mind, his sense of humor, etc. But according to you, if you were to say some particular incident relating to his sense of humor, which would it be?
One particular incident relating to sense of humor.
No, yeah, actually, because several, one incident I was a student at that time. There was a constitution bench. There was a constitution bench hearing the matter. 5 judges bench relating to this rectified spirit scandal. So the Justice Sethuraman asked him, whether licensing is required for fermentation or not, was the question that was raised. So Mr. Justice Sethuraman asked him, Mr. Ramaswami, is all fermentations are licensable? Yes, my lord, except Panayadu. So that was wherever you can't just put it in one nutshell. I mean, one instance of his sense of humor. So too much. So for example, with the lawyers, and whether, for example, one more incident I want to mention in Supreme Court, he was at least 4 times his matter was passed over. So he's coming, he was very busy, he was coming, he's coming. Then at 4:30 he entered the court. Then the judge asked, what, Mr. Ramaswamy, at 4:30 you are showing your face? But unfortunately, my lord, I can show only that. That's what he said. So his sense of humor is unparalleled. So it is not possible to give 1 or 2 examples. There are hundreds and hundreds of them. So
sure. I understand. So from talking about a wonderful gentleman who made it probably his trademark to be witty, to be humorous, to bring all the judges onto his side by his sheer sense of humor, etc. We move on to a person with whom I had 1 minute, please. Am I okay now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we move on to a person against whom I had the pleasure of doing a case in 1996. This gentleman in question was obviously Mr. Habibullah Badsha. In 1996, I was probably 2 years old at the bar, and Mr. Badsha was appearing in a writ petition, which was in respect of, that is Mr. Badsha, incidentally, for those of you who have not seen him. He was appearing for the writ petitioner in a matter relating to the customs, and I was appearing for Andhra Bank. And the matter was heard before Justice Jairam Chowta in present court hall number 24. And at that point of time, I remember Mr. Badsha started arguing at around 3 o'clock, and his turn was over by around 4. I got up on my feet and I said whatever I could. And the bell rang for the end of day's play. And Justice Chowta asked me, would you like to continue tomorrow? So before I said yes, Mr. Badsha got up and said, I would like it to be had day after tomorrow. So Justice Chowta was a bit surprised. He said, your young friend has to continue. You want it a day after? You can ask one of your juniors to be present. At which point of time, Mr. Badsha said, and I still remember it, is that my friend has not seen a particular judgment which will be in his favor. And I will call him to my chamber tomorrow and explain it to him, because I appeared before the bench in that matter. And that is why I'm asking for day after tomorrow. So the matter was posted 2 days later, and the next day, on cue, Mr. Badsha called me to his chamber and he explained it to me. That was the grace of the man, a man with amazing grace towards both the court and his opponents. And to talk about Mr. Habibullah Badsha, who better than Mr. Manishankhar? See Manishankhar? Mr. Manishankhar, I think you might have to unmute yourself and your experiences and your thoughts about Mr. Habibullah Badsha. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, we're on.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It is always pleasure to talk about Mr. Badsha, which I've been doing this for quite some time during this pandemic times. To start with Mr. Habibullah Badsha, I will have to start from Mr. Govind Swaminadhan, our boss, because it is through him my father got to know Mr. Habibullah Badsha. See, it so happened, if you want to take the lineage, like Rajah said, it started with Dr. Swaminadhan, in the later half of 19th century. Then it passed on to Mr. V.L. Etiraj. from A. Lithraj to Mr. Govind Swaminathan, and from Mr. Govind Swaminathan to Mr. Habibullah Badsha. And my father, who had studying law at that point of time, used to visit court, and he was lucky to have witnessed Mr. Swaminathan arguing in court. So at that juncture, he decided to stay in Madras, notwithstanding the fact that my grandfather was a leading lawyer in Kanjivaram. Therefore, he decided to stay in Madras to join Mr. Swaminathan's office. But however, he did not have any contacts to go to Mr. Swaminathan. But through a common friend, a relative, who was a junior to Mr. Mohan Kumara Mangalam, offered to take my father to Mr. Swaminathan. Then as soon as they entered Mr. Swaminathan's chambers, which was number 12 High Court chambers at that point of time, which later on was allotted to the Advocate General, which is present Advocate General's office, is Mr. Swaminathan's chamber at that point of time. So when both of them entered his chambers, the first observation or first remark by Mr. Swaminathan was, "How is that you have come to a bloody capitalist lawyer?" He was asking Mr. Mohan Kumara Mangalam's junior. Then he said, no, sir, he is my relative. He wants to join your office." Then he had one look at my father and said, "Have you got any auspicious day to join my office?" Before my father could answer, he said, "Today is my birthday. Therefore, it must be an auspicious day. You can join." Then immediately he called Badsha. Then from the next room, anterior room, Mr. Badsha came out and stood before Mr. Swaminathan. He said, "Badsha Chandrasekhar." So there, on that day onwards, 9/10/1968, my father's association, Mr. Badsha, started. And when Mr. Swaminathan was appointed as the Advocate General in 1969, there was a bifurcation in office. It was Mr. Govind Swaminathan, Mr. A.C. Mutanna, and Mr. Habibullah Badsha. Therefore, my father opted to go with Mr. Habibullah Badsha, and Mr. Badsha was also appointed as the Senior Central Government Standing Counsel in 1969. There, the association started. Then it was, therefore, I was fortunate to have been associated to join the chambers of Mr. Badsha, because Mr. Badsha's name I have been hearing from my childhood, maybe from 4 or 5 years old, since Mr. Badsha is a household name in my family, in our family. Therefore, when I completed law, I had no other choice but to join his chambers. And immediately told my father that your son is like my son, so let him join my chambers. That is how I got to enter his chambers. Otherwise, it was thought to be quite difficult to join the chambers of Mr. Govind Swaminathan or Mr. Mutanna or Mr. Habibullah Badsha. They had some standards fixed at that point of time. Then soon after I joined him in 1988, there was a long gap. I could watch Mr. Badsha only from a distance. I did not have any close association with him. It's lucky that there was one matter, a customs prosecution, which which started as a trial court. And there Mr. Badsha appeared for the importer, and Mr. Swaminathan appeared for the clearinghouse agent. So he told me, this being a trial matter, we will engage boss. So because your role is quite critical in this case, therefore you have to go appear along with boss in this matter. There, senior Mr. V. Vibhishnan was there, and with him I met Mr. Badsha, and I had briefed him in that matter. And I was fortunate in 1990 to brief both Mr. Swaminathan and Mr. Habibullah Badsha in the present EO1 court on this customs matter. I was seated in between them. To my left was Mr. Swaminathan, to my right was Mr. Habibullah Badsha. Those days, cell phones were not there. Otherwise, I would have had a picture of that sitting in the court hall. So that is how my career began. And there was again some gap in between, and where I could watch closely Mr. Badsha, how Mr. Badsha works. He is truly a master of all subjects. You can see him arguing a customs matter, then go to the original site to argue an application. Thereafter, he may go to the SISTAT for a regular matter in a customs or central excise case. That was his thing. But at the same time, he will also not accept so many matters in a day. If he had accepted 3 matters, fine hearing matters, he will say, have it the next day. He is not in the habit of accepting all matters and not turning out to court. If you entrust a matter with Mr. Badsha, you can be rest assured that he'll be there in court 5 minutes before the instructing counsel is there. The only thing which I have seen Mr. Badsha a little bit tensed is when the instructing counsel is not there, when Mr. Badsha enters the court. He used to be in court at least 10 minutes before the case is reaching. Of course, we had the luxury of being in 80 High Court chambers, which was in the ground floor at that point of time. Therefore, most of the writ courts were in the quadrangle. Therefore, once the matter is going to reach, we will get a call and we will just move up to the first floor. It is one of those cases that juncture, Mr. Badsha will feel a bit uncomfortable if the junior is not present. Otherwise, we have never heard a case, heard Mr. Badsha lose his temper or take on with a junior, either his own office junior or any instructing counsel. He was patience personified. You can, even if you don't understand, he will brief you, he will brief the junior. See, these are all the points. Like you yourself said in one case where he called you to his chambers and told you how what are the points in your favor and how to go about it. So these are all the broad characteristics of Mr. Badsha. If you take the qualities, he is very humane. Like humane, he need not even know the person personally. He is one of the rare persons who will respond to these newspaper articles or appeals where somebody says that a little kid has some congenital heart disease. Immediately he will pick up the phone, call my father and said, Chandrasekhar, please issue a check for this, without even disclosing from where it came. He will straight away issue that check towards charity to that hospital or to that wherever the appeal is sought for. Then not only with that to the strangers, but he had one, apart from the Ramzan time, you can see our chambers flooded with people for charity. In fact, we used to have one open file as charity file. And during admissions, college admissions, school admissions, since Mr. Badsha was associated with so many institutions, colleges and schools, we used to open one file for college and school admission file. Whoever comes, he will immediately ask them to wait, write out a letter, sign it, personally speak to the person concerned, either the principal or correspondent or whoever is in charge, and say that I'm sending this letter. So that was his helping tendency. He does it to everyone, even a court staff or a dafeda. He can approach Mr. Badsha and say, Ayya, and Mary and Payanaka seat Ayya. He will immediately ask him to come. He will dictate a letter, give it to that person, and immediately call that college and say, I have given a letter. Please consider giving him a seat in the branch which he has applied for. So that was the character of Mr. Badsha. Then as regards his juniors are concerned, we were part of a family. Initially it was Govind Swaminadhan, A.C. Mutanna and Habibullah Badsha. And this we can see, we used to always celebrate this Ayudha Puja. And one after that, we'll first assemble at boss's chambers, then go to Mr. Mutanna's office in Mysore Bank building. Then all of them used to come to our chambers at 88. And we used to celebrate this Ayudha Puja in grand style on the date of Saraswati Puja in the chambers, in the High Court chambers. Similarly, he used to treat all the juniors like his own family member. 80 family, it used to be called. And he knows each and every one of the family member. And not only Mr. Badsha, but Mrs. Badsha is equally affectionate to all the juniors. Whenever we go to his house, he used to get a call, we used to be called upstairs, just inquire about our well-being and how is the family. So that was the, that is how we were treated by Mr. Badsha. The same courtesy was extended not only to the chamber juniors, but also to the instructing council who regularly used to instruct Mr. Badsha. All of them became part of ATA. So that is how he treated all the juniors. Similarly, he will not charge anyone if a teacher comes to him or any, of course, any lawyer comes to him with any case, he will not charge any fees. Similarly, even in a big batch of matters where some 100 AUT teachers were involved, they were successfully challenging a notification issued by the university. Mr. Badsha appeared for all of them and obtained a stay. It was before Justice M. Srinivasan. He said he did not charge an IFSI, including the typesets were prepared at our cost. So that was the man, and he, on certain principles. Then with the other facet of Mr. Badsha would be his fairness, not only to the court, but also to the other side. There are any number of instances, like you have said in your own case, that he will not utter a harsh word to the court. Though his boss, Mr. Govind Swaminadhan, has a rough exterior, but he had a heart of gold. But Mr. Boss used to give then and there at some point of time if he felt that something is wrong being done in his presence, even be it the judge or the other side. For instance, if you say, we used to generally argue that your lordship knows. If the judge says, no, Mr. Badsha, this is a new proposition, you will have to explain. He will patiently explain. But one instance which I have heard as an anecdote, when Mr. Swaminadhan was arguing a matter before a judge, the judge, when his boss said, "Your Lordship knows," then the judge retorted saying, "No, no, Mr. Swaminadhan, you are the counsel, you will have to explain it to us." Then immediately boss said, "Your Lordship ought to know." Then kept on saying, "Your Lordship ought to know this proposition, ought to have seen this case." So that was the subtle difference between the senior and the junior. But whereas Mr. Badsha will patiently explain, never gets irritated, or even a question which is put to him is against him, he will say, these are the propositions against me, but I will tell you how this is overcome, how the facts are different. And with Mr. Badsha, if Mr. Badsha is appearing, you can never see the judge cross-verifying the facts with the bundle. See, I think that is one of the greatest achievement any lawyer can aspire for in this field. When you stand up and argue before a judge should not even open the bundle. Take your words as it is, unless there is any legal proposition which is involved. So I thought that being coffee with the bar, then I will stop here, pause here for a moment. Then we can chat later on, because there are two more speakers in this platform.
Thank you very much. And my follow-up question to you, as soon as you said something about Mr. Badsha, was I have personally seen his treatment of an opponent in court. So therefore, I would have probably guessed as to how he would treat his own juniors. But how was his, since you were with him literally like a child, how was his attitude towards judges? Because I think even at your age, it is definitely interesting and required to understand all this, so that we take it forward in a good way and we pass it on to the next generation of lawyers as to the manner in which judges have to be treated. A certain element of respect, a certain element of firmness, stand up for your rights whenever required. Have you seen any specific instance of Mr. Badsha saying anything to a specific judge? I don't mean it in a bad way, but generally.
Yeah. There are a couple of there are many number of instances, but to quote a few, I remember this thing. See, judge not necessarily a High Court judge or a Supreme Court judge. Even to a magistrate, if Mr. Badsha appears, he will give the due regards, courtesy to the magistrate. Even if he enters the magistrate's court, like our boss does, he used to bow and then enter the court hall. That is the respect he gives to the junior most judicial magistrate till to the judge of the Supreme Court. He treats judiciary in the same thing. Then the courtesy extended is remarkable, to be emulated. And never once he has stepped away or struck a different note with the judges before whom he appeared. And as regards the other side, even if the judges feel that he is in his favor, Mr. Badsha used to get up and say, "No, my lord, this is not the correct position. This is what we have to see." In one instance, which I can immediately recollect, was during that period when Mr. Badsha was the prosecutor between 74 and 76. There was a matter which was argued by Mr. K.K. Venugopal, and it was before a bench in the 4th Court Hall. Then he said he was raising some points which was not going well with the judges. He said, no, this point is covered, that point is covered. At that point of time, the instructing counsel was going on telling Mr. Venugopal, "Sir, this point is that, this point is that, this case is there." But Mr. Venugopal was not showing any inclination in taking up that judgment. When Mr. Badsha's turn came, he immediately stood up that, I have answer for all the points argued by Mr. Venugopal, but I don't have an answer for this, because the judgment which the junior is producing is the law as on today, as regards this point is concerned. The junior happened to be Mr. P. Chidambaram. And Mr. Badsha immediately considered the case, and based on that, the detainee was set free. So this is the courtesy, not only to the judges, but also to the other side, and to the other side, juniors.
And a remarkable morale booster for the junior.
And
yes.
He will never tell the court, if any point which is emanated from the junior, that this is a point, if it takes any appreciation from the court, he said, you immediately say, "Lord, this point was given by the junior, my instructing counsel." So that those are all very big moral booster for a
I'm
junior.
sure. Thank you very much for that small uh, brief about Mr. Badsha. Thank you very much. And once we're talking about treatment of juniors, I have to go to one person about whom, what can I say? He was the gentleman who enrolled me, Mr. Vedantham Srinivasan. I moved very, very closely with him. And this is Mr. Vedantham's photo on screen. I'm sure many of us miss him. And if, like Mr. G. Rajagopalan said, a lot of things to be said about Mr. G.R. Senior. Similarly, a lot of things to be said about Mr. Vedantham Srinivasan, and I'm sure V. Lakshminarayan, Justice P.N. Prakash, S.R. Sundar are all waiting to have a independent session where we can be very open without any restrictions. So this was the gentleman who, the first time I saw him was around 92, 93, when he was part of a batch of writ petitions challenging some mining legislation or mining order in Tamil Nadu. All the heavyweights were there, including Mr. Vedantham. And my friend and me, we were standing just behind Mr. Vedantham Srinivasan because we were not lawyers then. We had just a couple of months ago engaged him in a batch of 2 OSAs. So we came to know him, and this was the first time that we were watching him in action. And the rest of the senior advocates, they argued, and suddenly our friend, Mr. Vedantham, he got up and he pushed his glasses above his nose. And he took out, I'm not joking, this is a fact. When I was talking with Mr. Shankar also, he said, possible. He took out a Gold Flake King's packet. And adikku pinnadi, he had jotted down a few things. And he started off from the earliest mining legislation in history, which was somewhere in England in the 18th century. And he held fort with that Gold Flake King's packet for the next hour and a half. A man of many, many interests. And to talk about him, his disciple, the present Additional Solicitor General of India for the Southern region, Mr. Shankarnarayanan. Sir, please unmute yourself and then, yes. Yes, please.
Good evening to all of you. Sit down. It is right now 6:09. Stop me at 6:19, wherever I am. I don't want to waste your time and the listeners' time. You are right. He had written something in the paper for the Gold Flake cigarette pack. It's quite fitting for Vedantham. I met him when I was 17 and I was a student of Loyola doing my BCom. This gentleman came, tall, very impressive personality, his hands in his coat pocket, and a towering personality stood up and he said, I'm going to teach you commercial law. And there started my introduction to law. And the next 2 years, he did not merely teach us the commercial law as such, but the entire gamut of law. I have learned even income tax, everything in that particular 2 years period itself. He started with Lex Mercatoria. He said, in order to understand the law, you have to understand what is meant by Lex Mercatoria, how merchants lead to the framing of law in England, starting from 1066 AD, then thereafter ancient law, Roman law, then jurisprudence concepts, then the actual sections, reading, etc. 2 years, I never saw him carrying a piece of paper in his hand, never touched a book. All provisions, etc., he would say as it is, ingredients, section-wise, case law. He always believed not in giving citations. He never used to say it is 1936 Privy Council or something. He will always say this is the case cost title. Taylor versus Taylor. This is how you'll proceed. He was definitely impressed by the English judgments, but he also enjoyed the Supreme Court judgments from 50s to 60s.
He's a great human being as such, not merely a lawyer. His knowledge in music, his knowledge in cooking and making sweets, everything he had a liking, and he was an all-rounder. He was known as Miller Srinivasan in Loyola College days. He was a student of Loyola, and he was known as Miller Srinivasan, fast bowling and a good bat and a very good fielder too. He was interested in tennis, and he was a good bridge player, and above all, as I said, Carnatic music and Western music. He was a combination of all. When he taught us, he used to tell us only two things. That you have got to be truthful to yourself. In whatever profession whether you become a chartered accountant, because I did my BCom, there's a possibility. Most of my other friends went to CA. He said, you must be very truthful. When the client wants to do something absolutely immoral, he said, don't stand by his side. I distinctly remember when he wanted me to draft a petition and my first ground was that it was barred by limitation. He said, who taught you this? How can you say that something is barred by limitation? Try to meet it on facts. If the amount is otherwise due or if the obligation is otherwise to be performed, please perform. Don't try to excuse yourself. And he used to quote the first paragraph in Anson's law of contract, that each party has to keep up his bargain and the exceptions are only very few and far between. The sentence would read it otherwise, but this is the gist. He always believed that you accept the facts, never try to hide anything, produce all documents, and never advise your client to create a document to defeat a case. He was deadly against it. So he narrated a particular incident to me once. He adored his senior, Mr. V. C. Gopal Ratnam, whom he used to say, Saraswati Devi Ratnam or Vita Katuvar. Some senior advocate's clerk went and engaged him way back in 1954 to prepare a civil revision petition, and he prepared it. It was a question of doctrine of pious obligation. He had taken some defense in that, collected a substantial fee. After the clerk left, his senior V.C. Gopal Ratnam called him, and he used to call him as Dore. Dore, I go dictate. He said, yes, this is the case. This is what I said. So V.C. Gopal Ratnam told him, so you think on doctrine of pious obligation, the son can just say, no, I will not honor this commitment? Then he called the senior whose clerk came there, asked him to take back that brief, and asked Vedantham to return the money to the clerk. And the very next day, he reimbursed that money. He said, if money is your requirement, I will give you, but never take a defense which is immoral. It is not merely law, but it's a question of morality that matters. He was also very humane. When I say this, I'm a party to this or a witness to this. A lady advocate had engaged him. And after completing the matter, he got her necessary orders. She brought a check. He casually asked her, you seem to be quite old. Why you are not married? She said, there are certain financial difficulties. Then what he did was, immediately issued the same amount by way of a check, handed it over to her, and said that, please use this. Whenever you want money, you come and meet me. He believed that you must earn only that much that is required to have a contented life, nothing more than that. Of course, he was a bachelor, but he had a great amount of expenses also. He loved cricket, he loved his cars, big cars, he loved everything. And his overall interest in studying everything, every textbook, you can ask him any textbook, from end to end he would have read. The standing testimony would be the Sitaraman company, Chandar. He used to tell me that whenever they got a book, they will hand it over to him. Within 3 days, he will read it and give a comment. If Vedantham approves it, he will say it will sell. If he does not approve it, it will not sell. And he had a very good library, and he had read each and every one. When you ask him, he will say, you take that book, a flap, a color ink, and he will say, this is what I would have written. And he was such was a person. Sometime just before, about 5-6 years before his death, he wanted to prepare an opinion which had an income tax implication. Along with me, my friend Sethu Raman also worked, and we prepared a very detailed opinion. And that opinion was taken to him. He wanted me to read it. I read it. So he said, fine, it has come out very well, and let me sign it. Then he asked me, when you shifted the pages, why did you not read the last page? Then I told him he has taken it from the disclaimer clause, which is normally used by the big firms. He said, why don't you just read the disclaimer clause to me? Then he read it. Vedantham said, tear it off. There are only two possibilities. Either I know or I do not know. And I am signing it because I think I know it and therefore I am sure about it. No disclaimer at all. Even if the court disagrees, this is my opinion. And that was Vedantham. He was very precise in his submissions in the court. I will give you just two anecdotes. One was a case where he appeared before, I think it was Justice Mohan. Justice Mohan asked him, Vedantham, what is your grievance? Vedantham replied and said, my grievance is a horse which has not won a track event has been given a derby shield. Mohan said, admit interim stay granted. When he asked him, is it a matter related to the race course? He said, no, it is regarding MBBS admission. He said somebody who had secured a first class could not get it, but someone who had probably secured a second or third class had secured an admission, and that is what I said. The second instance was, he was leading me in a matter where I had filed an application before the Joint Secretary Imports and Exports with an application to waive the pre-deposit and asking for a personal hearing. The Joint Secretary never even sent a notice. Since there was no pre-deposit, held it against me, dismissed the main petition. By that, I had filed a writ petition. It came before Justice Mohan, sitting in the fourth court hall. So Mohan just read it and he said, Vedantham, what is your grievance in this? He said, I have not been heard. He did not give me the opportunity. So Justice Mohan said, Vedantham, very often you would have seen me. I don't even hear you. I dismiss the second appeals. What do you say about that? Vedantham told him, my grievance is this Joint Secretary is not willing to even go through this regular motion of hearing of the matter being called and I am presenting myself and thereafter dismissing it. He thinks he's higher than you and therefore dismissing it. So immediately Mohan had a laugh and granted a stay, posted the matter next week and we won in that matter. His humility. I had taken a corporate client, a director of a big company. He came with me and we were amidst a discussion. So somebody came in with only an Angavastram and wanted to meet Vedantham, China. As you know, he is more known as China. So he said, I wanted to talk to China. There was some noise. Vedantham said, ask him to come in. That gentleman came in, he saw Vedantham, and since he saw him in the amidst the clients, he just wanted to walk out. But Vedantham recognized him. He said, Patabi, eppadi paruka? Then he introduced that person to all of us, saying that he was a school dropout, but a wonderful cook. And he said, how to make a Mysore pak, you have to listen to this fellow. First, listen to him first. He had come to him seeking some help. This is the way he treated a person who was a school dropout, but to him it never mattered. That man had a skill, that man had a talent, and that talent had to be recognized. This was the man Vedantham was. And in another matter where we were there in a hotel for a party, when we succeeded in a big matter, there was a person who was playing a guitar. It was Western music. So somebody there, a counsel from Bombay, asked Vedantham, do you know what he is singing? What is your interest in music? Vedantham made him sit down, explained to him the entire concept of Western music, took a comparative position in Carnatic music, and he sang the entire song with all the ragas, everything. He explained all the nuances to him, and he said, music is a matter to be really enjoyed, and if you don't know music, it is definitely a curse if you do not know. When I completed my commerce course and I decided to enter into law, I met him and I wanted to seek his advice. He asked me, what do you propose to do after completing law? I told him I want to practice. He asked me about my family background. He said, you don't have a big family background. You're a first generation lawyer. He said, it's a very tough life. You will not be able to make it that easy. So he told me there are 3 golden principles. A, you must have a very good constitution. You must have the constitution of a horse so that you will keep running, you will never get tired. You must be willing to take road dust because you may not have time to eat. The third, he said, besides this, if you do not have a big background, marry a duke's daughter, even if she is blind. Let me tell you this, when I told this to another friend some time back and he called me after some time, I said, I followed the third principle of Vedantham. I'm well off, I have left in Tamil Nadu, no, I'm elsewhere, I have settled down very peacefully. He liked cricket and bridge like anything. When I was doing my 3rd year in BCom, when I went to his staff room to ask some questions, he asked me only two things. He said, do you play cricket? I told him I have got a great desire, but I have never even gone beyond the local club level. So it is very difficult for me to achieve anything in that. The next question he asked me is, do you play bridge? I told him I do play bridge, and he asked me what conventions do you follow, etc. The third question he asked me was, are you acquainted with Carnatic music? I told him I don't know anything about that. What he replied to me, Sriram, when I meet you personally, I will tell you what not to say. So he couldn't digest that I did not know the Carnatic music. I told you about Seturaman. His wife is she teaches dance and also a Sanskrit scholar. I introduced her to him. And when she asked something about dance and Sanskrit, Vedantham made her sit down and write down everything. And she was amazed. As a matter of fact, this morning when I told her I'm going to say something about Vedantham, she recollected this and said that what a great man he was, whatever subject he chose. His reading was absolutely astonishing. He could read any subject. As a matter of fact, you told me about this mining case where the word sewerage was used. He went into that question of mining law, how the entire word started in English system and how this word has been wrongly used in the present mining law. And Justice Satyadev said, Vedantham, so what is wrong in that? If somebody does not understand and use it, what is wrong in that? There was a repartee, which again, we will reserve it for a private conversation. But he was but when he thought, or when he still thinks that he was an arrogant man, absolutely not. He is one person who is not an hypocrite. And if he has done something, when you ask him, he will say, yes, I did it. There is no question of hiding anything. And he had a sense of humor, but it's a different class altogether, not normally enjoyed by all. I had a friend by the name Professor Swaminadhan. Some of you might have heard about him. He was the head of the Department of Commerce in Madras Christian College. He was also in Loyola when I did my pre-university. He knew Vedantham too well. Once I was talking to him about Vedantham, then he told me, you are right, that man's knowledge is absolutely astonishing, but what is the use? It is like Niagara Falls. You can enjoy it from a distance, but you cannot take even 2 sips from that. But he was wrong. I did take, and I have benefited. I am here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I have to say this about Mr. Vedantham. There have been many functions, many get-togethers that were organized by either Mr. Shankarnarayanan or Justice P.N. Prakash when he was a practicing lawyer. And for all of that, there were 2 definites. One was the presence of Mr. Vedantham. The other was A.K. Sriram as the anchor. I had this remarkable affinity for Mr. Vedantham, because of which I used to be called to anchor the show. And what a wonderful thing it was. His 80th birthday, which took place at Dharma Prakash, he had cooks, special cooks from Engen, sir, Udupi.
Ama.
Udupi, and the special cooks to come and do it. I'm taking a cue from what Mr. Shankar said now. Suddenly after the show, I'm going to tell you 2 things about that. Suddenly after the show, Mr. Vedantham was not to be seen. Everybody was waiting with bouquets and shawls and all that. Mr. Vedantham was not to be seen. He was arguing with the chief cook who had come down from Udupi as to how long it takes to, keep the Mysore Pak on simmering fire. And that was his expertise in that. That is number 1. Number 2, as soon as the speeches were over, I remember Mr. Gurumurthy spoke, Justice Jayasamma Babu spoke, Mandalin Srinivas spoke, and he said, I am prepared to sing before anybody, but before Vedantham Mama, I have my own apprehensions because he will find fault with whatever I sing. So as soon as this was over, the function was over. Everybody wanted to come up to Vedantham's, wanted to come up to the dais and, take his blessings, etc. Unfortunately, நம்ம professionல வந்து பேரை யூஸ் பண்ண முடியாது. We will have to say அவர் ஒருத்தரு, இன்னொருத்தரு, அவரோட மாமா, etc. So there was this judge who came, who put a shawl on Mr. Vedantham, and this was. I was holding on to Mr. Vedantham, and unfortunately, I had the mic in my hand because I was anchoring that show as well. So this judge, he put a shawl on Mr. Vedantham and then fell at his feet. And Mr. Vedantham, being Vedantham, suddenly turned around to me and said, "Yarra ma abdin." It was not disrespect. It's just that he just didn't know. He just didn't know. And afterwards, we had a hearty laugh about it. And at that point of time, I thought it was funny. Mr. Vedantham did not think it was funny. He said, "Even after you've told me the name, I find it difficult to identify the man." So that was the way he looked at things. And that was, thank you, sir, for your wonderful thoughts about Mr. Vedantham. And coming to the last person for the day, a person who was extremely colorful, extremely colorful man. But unlike Mr. GR Senior or like Mr. Vedantham, he kept it to a very limited circle. And that circle had the benefit of his, shall we say, his anecdotes, his jokes. And I was friends with Mr. VSS, as we used to fondly call, not to his face, of course, behind his back. We used to call Mr. S Subramanyan VSS. We had this fantastic bond going. I had this fantastic bond going with him because of our shared passion for foreign cars. He was mad after foreign cars, and so was I. And that's how he was close to me. And this is Mr. VSS with whiter than white turban, which would, increase his height by another 12 to 18 inches. A man who loved the good things in life. Thank you, Wilson. A man who would be very close, warm, and affectionate towards his immediate circle. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that circle. And once you were part of his intimate circle, this is probably for the information of Mr. GR Jr. Mr. VSS anecdotes and experiences, fantastic. And the language he used to use, pure words, which cannot be repeated at all. Absolutely pure words which cannot be repeated at all. And none of his experiences could have been made as a story, for the simple reason that not even one anecdote would have cleared the censor board. Such was the language, such was the graphic, vivid description. And to talk about Mr. VSS, that colorful man, who was also lecturer, professor at Law College, is probably his junior of longest standing, who subsequently went into service and has now been elevated, Justice C V Karthikeyan. Justice C V Karthikeyan.
Recalling my, but when you called me up and offered me this opportunity of speaking, at first I got a few nightmares, I must confess. The manner in which he used to be in office was totally different. The manner in which he was in court was totally different. And I think I have a duty to discharge to speak a few words about him. But I must point out that he was entirely a self-made man with a huge amount of determination to succeed in life. He came up from nowhere. Venkatesha Dikshidhar, his father, was economically not well off, and Mr. Subramaniam had to bear the financial burden and of the entire family. You know, he studied his intermediate in Loyola and then BCom and Vivekananda. I'm saying this because while studying BCom, he used to do work as an accountant in two firms way down in Broadway. And he was staying in T Nagar in Westmambalam at that time. And he used to say that he used to cycle all the way from his house to college, go back home, and then again cycle up to Broadway to earn a little bit to help the family's finance. So he knew the difficulties of and the importance of money, the value, and he never missed out on valuing that throughout his entire life. He also enrolled himself and then he did his ML And while doing his ML, there was one anecdote. He was writing very furiously, you know, the manner in which he used to correct the drafts and everything, whatever attention we used to draw him, he never used to look up at all. He used to keep writing and correcting the drafts. So when he was writing his ML exam, the invigilator came up and asked him, is this your, how many times have you written earlier? And Mr. Subramanyan was, you know, his repertoire, even at that age, he said, this is my first and last attempt. And then he was asked, what do you mean by that? If I pass, well, this will be my last. And if I don't pass, I will not write again. So he had a very strong sense of repertoire to answer back in a very few words to anybody who asked him questions. And after that, slowly he built up his practice. He was a professor of law from 1958 to 1988. He was not my professor. He was professor to the batch previous to me. And the manner in which I went to him was also quite strange. You know, while in law college, I was going to the office of Mr. Rangavajula Krishnamurthy. I do not know whether you might know about them. A very leading criminal side advocate in North Madras in Tandiarpet. My residence was in Tandiarpet, North Madras. And my entire work there was to translate all the 161 statements, the FIR, everything which was in Tamil, word to word in English, and hand it over and brief him on facts. So this adherence to facts was something ingrained. And later, after completing my law college in '89, my father had a friend, Mr. K.N. Balasubramanian, senior advocate, who was in 58 law chambers along with Justice M. Srinivasan. So they wanted me to shift to do some civil work. And my father took me to Justice Srinivasan. And Justice Srinivasan put us to Mr. V. S. Subramanyan. And believe me, we went over to his office late in the evening. I had a Rajdoot bike at that time, and my father was piggybacking a ride on me, with me. And we went to his office, and then the first thing we saw was this advocate. It was an entirely new experience for me, with a huge table, long, big table, and a pile of bundles in front of him, and then sitting behind. He used to suddenly scowl sometimes. But what attracted was the photo right above the gentleman. There was this photo of a gorilla which said, "The boss is always right," and which had a scowl, and that remains in my mind ever. And after that, he said, "All right, you come over to court the next day," and he said, "You come stand near the post office, behind the post office, where our car will come in." And I went there and stood and never recognized him, and he got down from his car, the Volvo, green Volvo he had, with his turban. And I could never understand that this was a person I met the previous evening. He was totally different. And Mr. V. S. Subramanyan in court, when he used to give instructions to us, it was always in innuendo. It was not a direct instruction. And that first day when he saw me, he said, "Go over to the 6th Court Hall and get a passover." 6th Court Hall was now annexed to the Bar Association, the small court hall which was at that time presided by Justice Abdul Hadi. And it was an insolvency matter. And I went there, and when the matter reached, I said Passover, and it was quite difficult. And I was feeling, now come on, please just say Passover behind me and after me, and then give me a Passover. And it was just Passover, Passover. And finally, the learned judge said, "All right, Passover." And I went back to Mr. Subramanyan and I told him that the matter has been passed over. I felt quite triumphant. And then he asked me, what was the first reaction of the judge? I said, the first reaction was to give a date. And he said, when I ask you for a Passover, it means that this is plan B. What I actually wanted you to do is plan A, which is in my mind, which is to get a date. If you can't get a date, then you should get a Passover. So that was the manner in which he used to train us. Now, Mr. Subramanyan, you showed the photograph of Mr. Subramanyan with his turban. And the tying the turban, I must say, is it's a big affair, a huge, long affair, you know. And it has to come out perfectly. And he used to have a cap first, and then wear the turban. And it is that cap was one or two of them were given by Mr. Amjad Nainar. I hope you know I remember advocate Mr. Amjad Nainar, who was very close to Mr. Subramanyan. So he used to wear that cap and then tie the turban. And he was very interested in foreign cars, as you said. Now, all of us know about his Volvo and the later day Mercedes Benz, which he purchased towards the end, cash down for 26 lakhs in Kerala, and he drove it down from Kerala all the way to Chennai. But he also had, there was a Daimler which was always there in his house, a big Daimler. It's a huge one. But he started off with an Austin, moved on to a Morris, had an Humber, a Chrysler, a Pontiac, and then the Daimler, and then the Volvo, and then finally with the Mercedes-Benz. You know, this penchant for foreign cars, so there were so many offers made to him to buy, offering him various vehicles. But the manner in which he purchased it is also quite strange. Somebody brings a car to his house, he used to tumble down, wear the turban, and come and try to sit inside the car with the turban. If it knocks on if the turban knocks on the roof, then the car is out. Car is not chosen. Whatever the brand and whatever condition it is in, brand new or whatever it is, even if the price is acceptable. If it doesn't fit him with a turban, no car. And he was also an avid card player. Trump and Rummy. He used to play with his family, spend a lot of time with them playing Trump and Rummy. That is something which he always continued to do for a long time. And the penchant for pens. He also used to have a affinity for foreign pens, and he used to find out the more sharper nib, a more sharper nib, and it was quite costly. 5,000, 10,000 rupees pen quite early in the early stages. Also 84, 89. He showed me a pen, and he said this was 7,500, a big black one with a very fine needle. And one more aspect was his adherence and his determination to work and work. You know, late in the night we used to work and bring out various law journals, bring out all the citations, give it to him. And next day morning he used to come out with a different set of citations. And he was never satisfied with however long we used to be there. There were days when I used to be in his office till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the night. And when I said I have to go back, he used to look at the clock and said, if you want to leave so early, how are you going to succeed in the profession? And there were days when I had to walk back home from T Nagar to Tandiatpet at that time in the night, because there was no bus also. And this Rajdoot always failed, you know. And the penchant with pens, and he also had an affinity for diamonds. You know, he had a big ring, the Navaratna ring, and he used to like diamonds also. And books, I must say about his book collection. All England reports, right from the first All England report, 1625, 1637 onwards, right up to the modern day. AAR from 1925 onwards, Law Weekly from 1914 onwards. Not only the journals, but also the books. He used to purchase them from Sheth and Company in New Delhi. He used to get the foreign books from England and was a regular supplier of books to Mr. Subramanyan. And he spent a fortune on them and always updating himself. And he always saw to it that he was one step ahead so far as his profession is concerned. So he went in for computerization quite very early in life. And also the dictaphones, he used to start suddenly dictating in dictaphone at all times, not sparing a minute. When the steno was not there, he'd start his dictation on the dictaphone, start off on that, and then record it, play it back, and then give it to the typist. And the typist, when he brings back the draft, he'll say, you are a typist. You're not typing it. You are a typist. You're making so many mistakes. The repertoires were truly amazing. And he was very much interested in two books. One was, which he taught, and he modeled himself against one of that, The Life of an American Workman. He used to quite often tell me about that, by Chrysler, who started off life from scratch, and who at one point of time, before he started the Chrysler Motor Cars, was the highest paid executive in USA. He wanted that to happen. And he valued his work so highly. And advocacy by K.V. Krishnaswamy Iyer, the book was not in, I don't know whether it is now in publication. It went out of publication, but printed by the Bar Council. So he had a copy made from Mr. S. Gopal, and a copy was also given to Mr. Ibrahim Khalifullah, who treasured it till the end. He also had, whenever he went to New Delhi for his cases, he always went to Supreme Court for his cases by himself. He stayed over at Mr. S. Balakrishnan's house. Mr. S. Balakrishnan is the father-in-law of Justice Subramanyan Prasad. They had a very good working relationship, and they had a room also. There was a room in Mr. Balakrishnan's house reserved for Mr. Subramanyan. And you know, he was very, very strict with his habits. My brother had taken him for one of our office cases to Singapore on 3 occasions, 2 days once, 3 and 3 days, for an arbitration matter. And right through those 2 days, Mr. Subramanyan did not eat anything from the hotel. He took a prepared food from Chennai, from Madras, took it there, puliyanjaram and then appalam and all those things, took it there, and that is what he ate. He refused to eat any food prepared by the hotel, and even coffee or tea. He never used to take milk also. So very frugal eater. And so far as his court appearance is concerned, one of the few advocates, I think we are not having that practice now, who used to put his leg on a chair and then start arguing. As he went on, the pitch used to go very high, and he used to get lost in his own voice. It was quite amazing when he did that, and used to know that he had reached his end. And then we had to pull his gown again and then tell him to start once again. And he'll start reading the evidence after that. So far as cross-examination is concerned, he used to pride himself for cross-examination. He was a trial advocate, not a good appellate side advocate or even a writ side advocate. But in as a trial advocate, starting from the small causes court, the city civil court, the additional city civil courts, and in the original side, he prepared himself like anything. He used to have colored papers in his office, blue, yellow, and paint of various sizes. And this is something which advocates should also know. Each document, each exhibit which had been marked will be entered in one particular page and a brief description of that. As juniors, we have to write that down. And for each document, so that used to be a sheaf of small scribbling size papers, which used to have. And cross-examination would be on facts on each one of the documents. And he used to say that cross-examination was not aimed to impress the judge who's recording the evidence, but to ensure that if the matter goes on appeal, to build a base till the appellate stage. So a cross-examination was going on a very lengthy basis. And towards the end, he had this fixation to go to Kailas and Manasarovar. That was in 2004, quite early itself. And I was associated with him from 1989 onwards. And, you know, with the juniors, he was very, very friendly, but with a very tight purse. He used to say, you come here to learn. And if you want to remove the L board, I'm not here to part with my earnings. You earn elsewhere and get your own clients. You know, I can go on record on this because 89 September, and then I had a bike accident, early stages. And that was something which brought out the human side of his life. Very considerate. And even afterwards, I had noticed that whenever anybody was sick, he used to rush them to hospitals. Whenever anybody approached him for financial aid for marriages, he used to fund them. These are aspects which not many people know. He had financed marriages and hospital expenses. After 6 months of being a junior, I think all of you should know his clerk also, Srinivasan. They were like pattern, it was like a pattern mic show. They both had it, one and the other were at the throat of the client, literally right through the period when they were together. And Srinivasan recommended, said that the junior has been coming for past 6 months and he said, the higher must pay something. So the first check which I received in 1990, around in May, was for rupees 200, you know. And I do not know whether any junior today would, say, even if you multiply it 10 times or 10 times to 2,000 or even to 20,000, a junior would condescend to work the long hours we put in for that amount as on date. That was something, but the procedure which he taught, the first principles of law, and he used to explain the facts of the case. That was an amazing quality of him. Any plaint which is drafted, he used to tell us why it is going in this particular direction, and which helped me a lot later on in life. And when he went to Kailash, he was fixer on that. The government refused to permit him on account of his age, you know, the government too. But then he got hold of a private tourist operator who was prepared to take him. And I had written my exam for this district judge post, but he never knew about it. And in fact, I had not told him that I was writing the exam. I had not even told my parents about it. My brother knew about it. And after that, on a Friday, towards the end of April 20, last Friday of the working day, the one before that, I received a call for interview on the Monday. And I didn't meet him before the interview. We had a family trip to Kodaikanal, went there, came back. And after that, on a Tuesday, I went and met him and told him I had an interview for district judge. He was very astounded. And, you know, not many people, successful advocates, all of you, would look askance at somebody suddenly going into service. You know, comparatively at that age, when you are financially well off and have that as a background, somebody taking into service he did not take it very kindly, but he said, think it over, whatever happens. But and in May, when I went him and saw him, he had this obsession to go to Manasarovar. It was in his, you know, that Pidivadam. That is one aspect which we must point out. He was determined to go. And I must say, among his friends and advocates, he had great respect for Mr. T.S. Gopalan, who lived close by, and to Mr. M.R. Narayanasamy, senior advocate. In one of the cases, I think it was the Palm Grove case in which he appeared, Mr. G. Subramanyan appeared on the other side. The client engaged Mr. M.R. Narayanasamy to lead Mr. Subramanyan. This was in the 21st court hall, which later became a museum. I do not know the number of the court hall now. And after that, when we came down the corridor near the master's court was there. A few advocates asked him, sir, you are our senior. Now, how did you feel briefing a senior advocate? He said, for Mr. M.R. Narayanasamy, I think it's my privilege to brief him. He had great respect for Mr. V.T. Rangasamy Iyengar, you know, who was a prosecutor, who was on the criminal side. I think, if I'm right, Mr. Rajah, correct me, Mr. Murari's grandfather. They appeared together in defending a police officer who was charged with bribe. And Mr. Rangasamy Iyengar gave Mr. Subramanyan the opportunity of beginning the cross-examination. And the entire case turned around in the cross-examination. The first question asked was, who asked you to take the bribe? And it appears that the accused pointed out to the de facto complainant and said, he told me to take the officer, his superior officer, and said the superior officer asked me to take the bribe. And Mr. Rangasamy Iyengar said, how did you get this intuition to ask this very risky question? So these are small instances when he felt that he could do well on his own in his career. And with respect to the division bench of Justice M. Srinivasan and S Subramanyan, you know, it was a very difficult bench. And they had this knack of dividing the work between themselves. We had a lot of matters before then. In one case, one used to be thorough with the facts and the other judge was thorough with the law. And they used to interchange the role. In the next case, Justice Srinivasan used to be thorough with the facts and Mr. Subramanyan with the law. So they both used to, as a unit, confront any advocate. And he used to prepare himself extremely thoroughly for appearances before that bench. There was one case which think I must point out, it is reported also, Mr. Shankarnarayanan's journal, CGC also reported, not very famous case, did not lead to much of a proposition of law. Shobha Vishwanathan versus D.P. Kingsley, I can remember it very well. You know, the strategy they adopted, that is something I want to tell if advocates are hearing. Of course, today it is not possible. You know, the Iron Dolia, Jayesh Dolia brought the brief. And it was an appeal by the plaintiff, by the defendant, who in a suit for specific performance, which was decreed, and the agreement had been admitted by the plaintiff, by the defendant. So it was a very difficult appeal, and there was a delay of 135 days. So what they did, they filed both the applications, application to condone the delay, and also application to fix a date for hearing of the main OSA without the appeal being numbered, without the delay being condoned before the division bench. It came up before an earlier division bench. A notice was ordered in both the applications. So before Justice, the bench headed by Justice Srinivasan, we brought up the application to fix an early date, to fix a date for, and then he got very wild when he found out that the appeal had not been numbered and there was an application to condone the delay. So this is one aspect, you know, I do not know how you will take it, but taking the bench through to a allied field. So they concentrated on this attitude of filing an application for control delay and fix an early date and the appeal to be heard, all to be heard together. And they concentrated on that and said that this practice is wrong, the delay application should be heard first. That is what the appellate side rule says, that is what the Order 41 says. And then by the time they entered the discussion on that, they forgot about the reasons given for the delay and said, all right, delay condoned. So took them through a roundabout way, got the delay condoned, went in for the appeal. And even in the appeal, he had it was a big gamble because we said that the agreement itself could not be enforced because of the FEMA Act, the one person being a non-resident Indian, permission should be granted, and got it through. There was an objection that all these were not pleaded, and he prepared himself. We used to have sometimes we used to have a session in the office and throwing out all possible questions which the bench will ask, and thereafter preparing ourselves for that. All the negative questions against the case and writing that down in a piece of paper and then preparing for all those negative questions, the questions which are against the client, and preparing them. There was one funny incident also, you know, at that time, the 23rd court hall, the court opposite in the ground floor, was presided by Justice S.T. Ramalingam, and it was a criminal bench. Mr. Subramanyan had never entered appearance in any of the criminal matters as an advocate. But this one case, he entered appearance for the respondent in a non-statutory habeas corpus petition. A friend of his from Kanchipuram had given because the boy had run away with the girl. And there was an application filed to the habeas corpus to bring the girl. So the police brought both the boy and the girl. And Mr. Subramanyan came in even before the case had reached. And senior advocate Mr. Ashokan was in his speech. The habeas corpus petitions under Act 14 was underway. Mr. S.T. Ramalingam was very surprised to see Mr. Subramanyan there, and he said, you should not be in this court. This is a very bad court. We deal with criminal matters. What are you doing here? And he said, I have this habeas corpus. And he said, all right, let us take a hold, held up all the matters, you know, the manner in which he used to talk, very frankly. And he called the boy and the girl. And he said, I both prepared to marry each other. The girl was of marriageable age. I think the girl said she wanted to go with the boy, not with her parents. And he said, no issues. Ayar irkari, inge kalyanathu panni vai. நம்ம கோர்ட்ல கல்யாணத்தை பண்ணிடலாம், ஐயர் இங்கே advocate here. Conduct the marriage. So, and later on, Mr. Subramanyan financed for the marriage was done. You know, and he reported back, and Mr. Justice S. Ramaningam said, I must know about that you did the marriage. You know, and after that he said, I'm not going to get involved into all these cases ever after. Let me stick myself to the civil cases. And, you know, this affinity for pen, affinity for computers to be a step ahead, and affinity for foreign cars, and at the same time retain his traditional outlook of the turban, of the tilak, which he used to take great pains to see that it comes into a perfect hue. And the strictness for the food which he eats, not outside, always home food. So it was a mixture of all that. And a person who could never be any other advocate other than a original side or a trial advocate never offers to him to become a senior advocate, but you know, somebody who receives salary and the fees in cash. You know, and all of you are senior advocates here. You'll have to disclose the income tax. It was something taboo. You know, what is received is what is received. Full stop. Not what is shown. And towards the end, the manner in which he died, I think probably that is the manner in which he invited himself. He would have loved to the end in which it came. It was very unfortunate. And Mrs. Subramanyan later on, she said that, well, yes, everybody said, Romba Punyam Panirgar going to Manasarovar and died, but she said, because the entire thing was in a big mess. You know, he alone knew what was happening, knew what was the cases, where the bundles were, where everything was there. And but anyway, things got straightened out at the end. And I must place on record the role of Justice Subramanyan Prasad. He was the advocate in Delhi in helping out at the last moments. You know, at that time, the place where he died was Chinese territory. So the death certificate was in Chinese. So bringing the body, helping it out, seeing to it that it was brought back within this country, brought to Chennai. So there they played, they had a very good role in that. But Mr. Subramania was a stand apart. You know, I don't think we'll have anybody else having the courage to wear the turban, going around. And, you know, after court, sometimes he used to tell me, come, let's go buy some fruits from the vendors on NSC Bose Road and in the adjoining streets. So he used to have, he used to remove his shirt, but the coat, and walk along. And it was quite funny. He used to be in his white and white with a turban on top of his head, and I used to go there with him with a bag, and Srinivasan used to come, one of the other clerks, and he used to walk around the NSC poster, and entirely everybody used to look at us, what is this, what's happening? And bargaining for the fruits and buying them and then taking them back to the car. It was fun. And even going back from court, used to stop at shops to do some shopping. And imagine the shock of the people there, somebody alighting down with a turban. When he goes abroad in the flight, he used to wear a turban and the coat. He never used to, he never abjured that practice. He was very proud of it. And apart from that, the adherence to religious rites, not pujas, but the rites which had to be performed. You know, when Natarajan his second son got married, he took a mic and then he was explaining the importance of each one of the rites, which are the rituals which were being performed during the marriage. He was thorough on all that. And when the Sringeri Acharya came to Chennai, he offered his car and took the Acharya in his car and the Volvo all over wherever the engagements were. So he had that affinity for the other side, those sides of life also, and also of getting the best out of whatever is available in the market, all the modern equipments. It was a contradiction in itself. You know, you can never associate this, this sort of a person with this attire with the modernity with which modern equipments with which he desired and which he got. And in short, this is it. Very thorough, but across the state, I've served as a district judge all over in most of the districts. And the name used to go Mr. Subramanian Jr. So many of them used to come in from adjoining districts and say, I was a student. So I think a lasting contribution was as a professor of law, because the first sight of a law student, suddenly somebody with this, this imposing attitude coming over and taking law and teaching law really went into the hearts of many of them. That's what that's the feedback I've heard. Very, very affectionate towards juniors, not on fees wise, but otherwise helped them all a lot. And not financially, but I've had breakfast in his house. We used to have sit in the evening. Also, he was very hospitable and he used to discuss the cases. That was one of the wonderful things which he did. All in all, gentlemen to the core. And I feel it really fortunate in my life to have to be associated with him. And till this date, not many days pass when I don't remember him. I'm fortunate for the post I'm holding and for everything, you know, for all that has come up in my life. In this career, I owe a lot, everything to him. So I thank you also for this opportunity. And if any questions come across, maybe a little more detail about the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. For those outstanding nuggets and trivia about VSS, as he was fondly known to us. The only thing I think you haven't mentioned is the fact that when he bought his last car, which was the brown color Mercedes, it was not just a Mercedes, it was an S-Class. S-Class, and he had a certain element of pride in that, and he always used to tell me, "Hey, when the Mercedes, if I can buy it in one check, I will buy it that day." And I believe that he paid for it in one check. A lot has been said about all these wonderful lawyers, wonderful people, colorful people, and their treatment of juniors. Justice Karthikeyan has also been candid enough to say VSS was a wonderful man towards juniors, but let's not talk about the money. Okay, that's a separate thing. But there are two people to whom I would like to ask something on the question of juniors. One is Mr. Rajah. I have always heard about Mr. Govind Swaminadhan, that he stood up for juniors no matter what, no matter where. I have had it passed down to me from my own father that there was this judge probably in the 5th or the 6th court who was heckling a junior, and Mr. Govind Swaminathan was there. And Mr. Govind Swaminathan, with no effort to lower his voice, specifically said, so that the judge could hear, that you were a junior at one point of time. Have you come across, Mr. Rajah, any such incident where, he took up for a junior at any point of time?
Plenty. Actually, what would happen is, interestingly, that when we were briefing him in a matter, and usually, when judges find that there is something wrong with the case, they will not tell a senior that you are not conducting the case correctly. What they will say is the junior has not briefed you properly. So in all such instances, Mr. Swaminathan will tell the court, if there is anything that has been done well in the case, my junior is responsible for it. If there is something defective or deficient in the case, please address me. I am responsible for it. So that would put the judges off. And this has happened so many times that he would tell the court that please don't say that my junior is responsible. I am responsible. If there is something has gone wrong, I take the responsibility for that. And one other incident is that comes to my mind is Justice P. Shanmugam, when he was the AGP, a particular judge was coming down on him like a ton of bricks. And Mr. Swaminathan was in the court hall. And every time that the judge made a caustic comment against the AGP, he would turn to look at Mr. Swaminathan, expect him to nod in agreement. Mr. Swaminathan was watching the spectacle for a few minutes. And then Mr. Shanmugam was known to do his work very well. So he stood up and said, "My lord, I don't think that what you're saying is right. He is one of the very conscientious government leaders. All of us make mistakes. If he has made a mistake, I think he should be forgiven. And I don't think it is right that you should come down so heavily on him." This is not even a junior who was instructing him, but because he felt that somebody was being treated unfair. And one of the first persons to land up when the news that Mr. Swaminathan had passed away was Justice Shanmugam, and we had, reserved a book on which the persons who were attending could make their comments, could leave their comments. Mr. Shanmugam has written this incident in that book also and said, "I'm thankful to this great man who I don't know him at all. He didn't know me at all. But he had observed me in court and he knew that I was doing my work conscientiously. And when that was being challenged in court, he stood up on my behalf and told the court that the court was being unfair to me." And that I think is another remarkable aspect about Mr. Swami.
It just shows the character of the man. The second person to whom I would like to ask something about on the topic of juniors is Mr. GR. Sir, as far as GR Senior is concerned, you'll have to unmute yourself, sir. As far as GR Senior is concerned, and Mr. Vedantham, both of them were slightly quirky. I mean, you never knew what they would say next. It could be a scolding, it could be a bouquet, it could be a brickbat, it could be an insult. Both of them were slightly quirky in that sense, and both of them enjoyed a drink. Yesterday, when I was talking to Mr. Shankarnarayanan, I asked him, everything that your senior was, you did not believe in. At least most of the interesting things. How did he take you, being a teetotaler, as his junior? What Mr. Shankarnarayanan said last evening to me will remain private between us. But now, GR Senior, having so many interests, did he look for something specific when taking a junior on? Because Manishankhar specified that it was difficult to get into Mr. Badsha's chambers. It was difficult to get into Mr. Govind Swaminathan's chambers for various reasons. Adumadri, did Mr. GR Senior look at something when taking a junior in?
No, I don't think. But after he joins, then he will try to put him into the practice. That is. But we never see. Some people recommend him. Therefore, it was not very difficult getting into our office. Even the ordinary man can get into our office. Only thing is that after some time you'll ask. But only problem is that while discussing, but you should not think merely because he's drinking with you, you will not shout, because we do not know at what point of time he will bounce on you. So you should be thorough with everything and also drink. Otherwise, you should not drink with him. Otherwise, you will.
Okay. And that is one. Another aspect is, how was he towards opponents? Because na najama paatitilla. I mean, many of us haven't seen him except people who are upwards of 55, 60. Many of them wouldn't have seen GR in his heyday in Madras. How was he towards his opponent lawyer?
He really treated them as, because whenever Govind Swaminathan and G. Ramaswamy argued, they fought. Whenever VP Raman and G. Ramaswamy argued, they had sharp exchange. Even Venugopal. Therefore, he never, actually, he will, to be very honest, he will be treat them with, he wants to win the case, and he will not even give a chance to other side to get over him. Therefore, there is no question of any niceties in all these things. We should be very frank. And if he takes up a case outside, he will be very friendly. That's a different matter. But he was always tough on the other side.
One thing I must mention, Sriram,
Sure.
I was briefing Mr. Govind Swaminathan in a matter in which Mr. GR appeared against him. And as Mr. G. Rajagopalan says, it was quite a pitched battle. It was this famous ITC versus GTC for their trademark gold flake. And it was a real pitched battle. And Mr. G. Ramaswamy called Mr. Govind Swaminathan the most arrogant man he has ever seen in his life in court. And then it went on like that. But that evening, GR had the grace to call Mr. Swaminathan and tell him, "I'm sorry, sir, I should not have used those words in court." The thing about Mr. Swaminathan is he would not make much of all this, and at the end of the day, everything is forgotten. As I said, once he steps out of the court, everything is forgotten. And so he told Mr. G. Rajagopalan, you are free to say whatever you want. I'm not, this is not on my mind at all. The moment I stepped out of court, I have forgotten all that, so don't bother. So these exchanges are very common between advocates, and I think they were mature enough to understand that this is not a burden you carry with you after you step out of the court.
Okay, that's a remarkable incident. Just as an aside, has this been passed down in the genes? What happens when you appear against GR Junior?
No, but see, Mr. Swaminathan's life is a book from which we all try to learn. So these are things, I'm talking about all these things because hopefully these are models that we are following. But unlike Mr. Swaminathan, I am not given to lose my temper, thankfully. So there is never a question of my being harsh on any side. But these are examples. See, when Cho Ramaswamy was asked to name some of the great people that he had worked with and who had inspired him, he started the list with Kamaraj. And they asked him, so why was Kamaraj great for you? He said, காமராஜருக்கு முன்னாடி நான் நிற்கும்போது எனக்கு சத்தியத்துக்கு முன்னாடி நிற்கிற மாதிரி எனக்கு ஒரு ஃபீலிங், எனக்கு சத்தியத்தோட பேசுற மாதிரி ஒரு ஃபீலிங். You know, that is the same feeling that anybody who had coordinated with Mr. Swaminathan would have had. That you had a feeling that you are living with truth, you are coordinating with truth, you are speaking to truth. There is nothing artificial or false about him. I don't think there was a part of his mind which thought differently from that other part of the mind which impelled him to speak. So these were both always in unison. So there was no artificiality about it. Importantly, there was no malice about anything. He had absolutely no malice against anybody. In fact, if he had fought with a person the previous day and the next day that person had come to him for help, he would not find a person to help him better than Mr. Swaminathan. So these were things that did not matter to him in life. What mattered to him was the issue. And if the issue was concerned, he spoke his mind and there was nothing which stopped him from speaking.
Okay. Now coming to Mr. Badsha, I've heard of this very, very interesting anecdote as to how this actress Khushbu was building a house next or opposite to Mr. Badsha's house. And one particular room in her proposed construction was causing him some discomfort. And very strangely, he did not issue a notice or anything like that. Mr. Manishankhar, I'm sure you know about the episode. Would you probably share it?
Yeah, it was the very next door. She bought it from Mr. Vodaya's brother. And they immediately started putting construction. There were also some encroachments. And especially this toilet was directly facing with the windows open. So Mr. Badsha was in fact initially, he was told by his family members to issue a notice. In fact, he called me to issue that notice. But once before that he said, no, let us not jump the gun. Let me have a word with her. So that he called her and said called her for a tea or something for one evening. And politely told her, said, this is what the grievance, and that he has been there from 1952 onwards in the same place. And it doesn't look nice to have to wake up in the morning and look at the toilet coming up next door. So immediately she said, no, sir, no, we will alter it. And she altered to her credit also. That's what happened.
So Badsha was an ultimate diplomat. I mean, it's very difficult for anybody to fight with Mr. Badsha, to pick up a quarrel with him. So he was completely different from Mr. Swaminathan in that sense.
No, the reason that I probably mentioned it was due to the fact that in this day and age when lawyers, advise their clients to issue notices, forget issuing notices, file cases at the drop of a hat, it would have been by hath ka khel for him to issue a notice through Manishankhar, for example, and not having done that, to try and, resort to mediation, so to say, as the first resort. There was a remarkable insight into the nature of the man. That is why I probably wanted to mention it.
He
It's one
practices
thing.
with clients.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because if brothers come or some friends come, he first
Okay.
sit with them and try to mediate.
Okay. There is something that Justice C V Karthikeyan sort of hinted at but did not go into. When Suresh Krishnamurthy and I went to greet VSS on completing 50 years at the bar, நாங்க வந்து கிறிஸ்டல்ல பண்ண ஒரு சின்ன லிங்கமோ ஒரு ஸ்மால் விநாயகர் மேட் ஆஃப் கிறிஸ்டல் எடுத்துன்னு போனோம். That was effectively the first time that we are visiting VSS oda veetla வந்து after ஒரு 6:30 in the evening. It was sunset already, and then we were ushered into his room, and believe me, it was freezing. That was number one. It was freezing. It was much below this 16 that our ACs are capable of displaying. They're freezing. The second thing was, I suddenly had a doubt that I was on the sets of Agni Nakshatra because there was almost no light. The பழையகாலத்து ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ல வந்து when somebody is being operated upon and they are going to die, அந்த ஒரு solitary light, ஒரு inverted Chinese cap மாதிரி, it will be swinging from side to side. அது மாதிரி ஒரு light, and behind it ஒரு ghostly figure of VSS sitting. And on his table, believe me, on his table, ஒரு small St. Thomas Mount மாதிரி ஒரு pile of cases, pile of bundles. So Nanu Suresh Krishnamurthy, we were, generally having a chit chat with VSS, and suddenly one gentleman, one of his clients comes in, ஐயா அடுத்த வாரம் வந்து லிஸ்ட்ல போட்டிருக்குதுன்னு சொல்றாங்க. என்ன பண்ணணும் உனக்கு? சாட்சி சொல்லணும். சரி, இங்கதான் எங்கேயோ இருக்கும் பண்டில்ல, முடிஞ்சா தேடி எடுத்துக்கோ. That was how VSS was. We were astounded. And one thing that Justice C V Karthikeyan did not mention was he was a great fan of cars, foreign cars, Benz, and he and my father, they used to order these collars and bands made of plastic and the finest of Egyptian cotton from a place called Ede and Ravenscroft in London. And each band, each collar was something like 10 pounds, 11 pounds, and they used to be like small children as soon as the beautiful package came. So man of remarkably fine taste, and as Justice Karthikeyan said, in spite of all that, he was firmly planted on the ground.
Can I just say,
Oh,
Sriram?
sure.
No, one of his ambitions was to buy a Bentley car. He had all the pictures of the Bentley cars in a stable, and he wanted that. He just had that as an aim to ultimately at some point to buy a Bentley car. But of course, all of us know he couldn't do it. And so far as this foreign items are concerned, they're not restricted to just the cars. As I said, Austin, Morris, Pontiac, Chrysler, he had all of them, second-hand cars. At various stages in his career, he had a Daimler, a Volvo, and finally landed up with Mercedes S-Class, as you also said that. At that time, there were only 3 such cars in Madras, in Chennai. At the time when he purchased it, he said he was very proud of that fact.
Yeah.
And this desk of his, you can never find out anything. And one of the tricks which I picked up was to look at his face, whenever any client comes in, and the manner in which if he says yes, then it is an indication that we should pick up the bundle. And if he scowls and says yes, then the bundle is lost forever. Let the client come back with the further instructions, with the instructions in inverted commas, and then the bundle will surface. He was very thorough. He was particular on all these aspects. He valued himself. And later on in the court, when the client sees this advocate alighting from a Volvo car with a turban, he knew he had his money's worth.
True. That's true. And but talking about Mr. Govind Swaminathan, it's often said that he gave back to society tremendously, not just our legal system. Is that right? I mean,
Yes.
not too much is known about that.
See, one aspect that you must remember about Mr. Swaminathan is that he was completely insulated from issues relating to finance by Mr. A.C. Muttanna, later Mr. M. Subramanyan, Mr. Shivam. So he did not have anything at all to do with the world of finance, right? All this used to be managed by them. But anybody who came to him seeking any help would immediately receive assistance without a further question. And he also wanted to be actively part of institutions which served public interest. That's why Balamandir, which was actually started by Kamaraj and his mother, Ammu Swaminathan, after that time, he took over as president of Balamandir. And in the book that we have brought out, A Gentleman's Lawyer, Maya Gaitonde, who's currently looking after Balamandir, explains the amount of commitment he had towards the institution. There were so many public institutions in which the affairs of which were directed by him, and he took great interest in molding the manner in which that institution should develop. And those were the days, even when he was president of Madras Bar Association, every committee meeting of the Madras Bar Association apparently used to be held only at his residence. There was no meeting of the Madras Bar Association in the High Court at all. So long as he was the president, every committee meeting would be held at the residence. They will all be served tea and coffee and biscuits, and it would be an excellent experience for all of them, with the sole aim of trying to improve the institutions that he was associated.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now, all these people, many of these people had their own slight oddities, eccentricities, etc. For example, with Mr. VSS, I have appeared against him. So at the city civil court, in the high court, etc. So, we talk about office copy, rendu white. VSS oda bundle la vande office copy, rendu pink or rendu blue, rendu yellow. He used to have all these fancy colors. Only his turban and his trousers were pure white. Everything else was absolutely colorful about him, including his cars, green and brown and all that. Similarly, he had this this odd penchant for these kind of colors. Adamadri, did Mr. GR have any quality that was, eccentric or quixotic or anything like that?
No, nothing.
No,
because he became a senior counsel in 1976.
Okay.
So monthly, probably they are filing about 150 or 200 cases. He will never bother because there are a battery of juniors. No question of color, nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. Nothing specific like that.
Okay. Now, asking Mr. Shankarnarayanan about Mr. Vedantham Srinivasan. Would you call Mr. Vedantham Srinivasan eccentric? Don't be politically correct. You have to unmute yourself. Not to be seen.
No. Definitely not an eccentric.
Okay. Okay. Any habit of his? Was he very passionate about some such quirky thing, which was not the usual thing?
Except his books on various subjects.
Okay.
On various subjects, underline.
Okay. Okay. I remember when I took Mr. Vedantham to Hyderabad for an arbitration, and while coming back, there was some turbulence on when we were flying Jet Airways, and the pilot was called, and he was given a serious sermon about aerodynamics, and it was not helped by the fact that the flight was at around 32,000, 35,000 feet, and Mr. Vedantham was slightly higher than that. So
I can just add to you, Vedantham and I were returning from Delhi
Okay.
We went from here to Delhi. Somayaji was also with me.
Okay.
So the flying time between Chennai to Delhi and Delhi to Chennai is slightly different. There will be 20 minutes difference.
Correct.
So I asked him a casual question. Why is this so? He immediately called the crew and he told them, do you know why? Then he gave a complete lecture on aerodynamics and why the 20 minutes difference is there. He quoted authorities, textbooks, shops where it is available, everything. Within 20 minutes over.
Okay. So
I would like to mention one
sure.
quirky thing of Mr. Govind Swaminathan. Whenever he was traveling out of town, he used to have a very strange garb. He had a Nepali cap. So he used to wear a Nepali cap and he used to tie a kerchief around his neck. I don't know for what. I mean, it was like some Madras Rikshakaran type of kerchief that he used to tie. Apparently what happened is once he was traveling like that and the car stood at a railway crossing. So the train was taking a little time in coming. So he stepped out of the car. I think at that point of time he was the AG or something. He stepped out of the car and went and sat on a small wall which was very close to the railway track. And there is a policeman who saw him, who came and asked him, "Enappa, சும்மா இங்க வந்து உட்கார்ந்துட்டு டயத்தை வேஸ்ட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்க, கிளம்பு கிளம்பு." And the juniors came running to tell the policeman that he was the AG. He told them not to tell them and quietly got into the car and then left after the railway gate. So this is one aspect that he used to wear this hat, a wide-brimmed hat, or this Nepali cap and a kerchief, which used to be extremely amusing to me at least. And once when we were going in the car and the car stopped at the, I think, Music Academy signal, there were two young boys who were coming in a cycle. And they also parked their cycle next to our car. And one of them looked at boss and said, and his gesture was so funny that it had us all laughing because those two kids were highly amused by the fact that here was a man in these days and times going out to the wide-brimmed hat of the kerchief around his neck. That I thought was a very quirky thing which he did.
Okay.
One minute if you can spare me.
Yeah, sure.
The car with Mr. Subramanyan.
Sorry? No, you're not very audible. Yeah.
When Mr. Subramanyan was driving, he was always driving the car. He loved to drive the cars. He never had a driver. And he had a penchant for driving his cars.
Yes, always.
And these foreign cars, they had two headlights on both the sides. You know, very powerful headlights. Once when we were near T Nagar, late in the evening, he had switched on the headlights and he was driving. And the policeman flagged him down. And you know, he was having his official dress with the turban and at that time with the coat and the tie. And he just pulled down the window and he barked at the policeman, "What do you want?" You know, and you should see the shock in the face of the policeman. Suddenly somebody with a turban peeping out of the car and on the left-hand side. It was a left-hand drive.
Correct.
Saying, "What do you want?" He said, "Ayya, the headlight, one headlight off on You know, he was very proud of the small things which the car had. And the rear mirror, which was very fine, which was very fine, you know. It could narrow down the vision, broaden the vision, small things in those vehicles, of which he was very proud. And barked at the policeman like anything. I can never forget the face of the policeman. We saw this sudden human being with a turban shouting it like that.
Now, this is something that is probably common to most of these gentlemen that we have been talking about. Namely that, they've had a brush with the law, so to say. As far as contempt is concerned, they have had a close shave with it, presumably because of the fact that all of them were very, very convinced in their mind that they were right and that it had to be said for whatever reason. So I'm sure most of you, but I will ask this question to Mr. GR. for various things, including for repartees and one-liners, which could have been at the expense of the bench as well. I'm sure there have been instances where the judges have not taken too kindly. So do you think it was because of the fact that Mr. G.R. Senior felt that it had to be said or the situation had to be diffused? Or what do you feel?
No, it is because everybody knew about him. Therefore, I don't think he never faced a situation where. But there are sometimes he wants to put down the judge because if he finds when the multi-member commission case was being argued, election commission was being argued, the Chief Justice at that time was not allowing him to argue at all. What is his name? Ahmadi was not allowing him because everybody was blocking him. They didn't know how to stop it. Then at one point at time when he said, Mr. Counsel, he saw G. Ramaswamy and said, Mr. Counsel. Immediately he said, I thought you know my name. See, therefore, thereafter he never opened his mouth. He had his own way of saying. There are so many jokes that has happened in Kuldeep Singh's court about Choli ke piche kya hai. I don't know whether you know about it or not.
Choli ke piche I do not know, but I know Soli ke piche.
Soli Sorabji was standing. Sorabji was standing. And immediately he went and there was a girl standing there and he went and said the girl was standing behind Soli Sorabji. So he went and asked, little bit of Hindi, not much. A lot of jokes about this Hindi. And said, Choli ke piche kya hai? Then Kuldeep Singh had, what Mr. Ramaswamy, it is a court, what you are saying? Oh, my lord, Choli ke piche Sorabji hai. There are a lot of jokes about him not knowing Hindi also was there. One day he was going to Madura. So, because there was a Hindi driver, he didn't know Hindi. So he wanted to pass urine. So he said, driver, ye kata hai. He saw in front of the car and said, koi nahi aata hai saab. So again he said, ye kata hai. So like that, he actually forced him to stop, then went and like that, a lot of jokes about him not knowing Hindi and other things are there. So
இது மாதிரி ஒரு incredible high level of Hindi இருந்தும் வந்து he managed in the Supreme Court.
No, Mr. Swaminadhan also used to.
Once he said, I'm an Indian, not a Hindian. So that became a very controversial statement.
Oh, I see.
So Swaminathan was also self-conscious about the fact that he couldn't speak Tamil or any of the Indian languages. But one thing, he said that it was a saving grace for me when I was an advocate general. I had asked him, boss, you had been the advocate general, so did not ministers or the chief minister try to interfere in the manner in which a particular matter was happening before court? He told me my greatest advantage was that I did not know Tamil, because the phone would ring, I would pick up, and there would be a voice on the other side saying, "Na in the minister pesren, the case apati," and he would tell them, "Could you repeat that in English? I can't follow what you're saying." And the phone would go dead at the other end. So he said his greatest advantage during this period that the ministers did not influence him was because he did not know Tamil. And one day I was sitting with him, and his car had been parked on the road, and his driver Hamid had gone out somewhere, and another driver, his son's driver, had come. So he threw the key at him and said, "The parpa, car shedle park padu." And that man nodded his head and went off, and that driver did not know English. So he sort of triumphantly turned to me and said, "My Tamil is improving, you see, he actually understood me." So I said, "Boss, in the 4 words which you spoke, except for inge parpa, everything else was English. So that man's English has improved. Your Tamil has not improved."
Okay. Now, coming to the question of, I mean, all these people were wonderful, original, colorful people, but the fact remains that all of them were extremely successful, and therefore, no session on them would be really complete without at least a minute or so on their preparation for a case. In preparing for a case, I'm not going to ask Mr. Shankarnarayanan about Mr. Vedantham because we've had enough of gold flake filters and gold flake kings sort of packets and jottings on that. We're not going too much into Mr. Govind Swaminadhan. I would probably ask Manishankhar, how was Mr. Badsha's preparation for a case?
It was like going for a war.
Okay. Okay. Blueprint.
Yeah.
Everything is ready.
Facts. Yeah. List of dates, synopsis, charts, content.
Charts. So Badsha was famous for his charts. Every case we had to make a chart with the plaintiff's statements, what the defendant has said, reduce everything to a chart so that there is a clear plan for the argument.
Flow chart, basically.
Yes.
Okay. So, and all the juniors, Manishankhar, all the juniors had to be thorough with that, is it?
Whoever has to work with him will have to follow this.
Okay.
And you
Right.
get used to it. Even thereafter, now I get developed a habit. Without those things, even I'm not comfortable arguing matters in court.
Okay. But anyway, it's a good habit that's passed on, though bad for your juniors. Okay. Probably from this extreme, we will go to that extreme. We will ask GR. How was GR Senior's way of preparing for a case?
Actually, he had a list of dates.
Okay.
Normally he have a list of dates. All authorities by heart. So no need to tell him any authority. But if you directly brief him, sometimes last minute briefing, he just make a note on the paper itself, on the bundle itself. And he will listen for 10 minutes and he will argue with us.
Oof. That is what I was informed, but I found it very difficult to believe that a person of his stature, 10 minutes, that's it?
10 minutes, I have instructed him from one court to the other, heavy matters.
The same has been said about VP Raman as well.
VP Raman was very brief. He was not quoting authorities.
Yes.
So he won't repeat. That is one thing. So
Yes.
the difference between G. Ramaswamy will repeat. And he will not leave till the judges agree. But VP Raman will sit down. I said, I won't repeat.
Okay. So Mr. GR was a repeater. Okay. Right. Now we'll ask, how was Mr. VSS and his preparation to cases? Oh, was it very elaborate, like his attire and dress and all that?
Very, very elaborate. You know, as I said earlier, note down each document in a separate sheet of paper. It was fundamentally being thorough on facts. And there was one incident, you know, he was appearing for a doctor, I don't want to say the name, who had a litigation against his brother. And he had taken the chief examination before this proof of debate thing came in. He took the chief, and in cross-examination, the doctor said directly contrary to what was given instructions. So the instructions given to Mr. Subramanyan. And he immediately stopped. And he said, I'm not going to handle this case. There itself, he stopped in the original side. He said, I'm not going to take up this brief, and walked out. That was one thing, because he was always thorough on facts. This is something which came into me also, even when I was sitting on the writ side. I used to ask the counsels, what are the facts? Though, of course, it's not so much on that, but very thorough on facts. Every word and every document, every exhibit, every statement, we used to break it down into bits of papers and put it in a separate sheet. So very thorough. And so far as citations are concerned, he used to work it out on himself. And one thing is, he had a penchant for lining books on the table. I do not know whether you've come across that. Nowadays, it's not required with all this internet thing coming in. But he was an advocate who used to line up books on the table before the argument. Whether he actually uses them or not, a huge set of books on the table. And the foreign books also, Lindley on Partnership, Anson's, everything, he used to line them up. That used to give an imposing attitude in the court itself. But thorough on preparations, very thorough.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Shankar, Irkala? Has he gone?
Yeah.
So, briefly.
Before you proceed, Vedantham filed the suit on behalf of one Hyderabad gentleman against Ramnath Goenka. The suit was recently 410 of 1982.
Yes, I have followed it.
That suit, he made the opening argument before Justice Jeshama Babu, an hour and a half. Mr. Jesham, I'm sure you remember, he said about this in his 80th birthday felicitation.
Yes,
he said, I have never heard an opening argument of that kind any time in my life as an advocate or as a judge. In fact, you see, 3 trunkloads of documents, but everything went only by memory. He could start from the beginning, go to the end.
Goenka litigation was with practically every officer. Vedantham Srinivasan was, I know that also. He was, that actually after that, for one of the defendants, for the daughter, Saroj Goenka, we had entered appearance in my name, Mr. Subramanyan entered appearance in my name. Later it came before me. I think it was, that was completed only very recently.
Yes.
S Subramanyan completed it.
Okay. Mr. Manishankhar, if you could have one quality that your senior had, what would that be?
He had several good qualities. The humane nature, that is, he had a sympathetic ear for everyone from all walks of life. Considerate. And he was, of course, thorough as far as the profession is concerned.
Okay. So that is something that you would like upon yourself. Okay. Sorry, would any of you like to say anything specific? Just in case there is something on your mind and you want to say it before we sort of wind up.
Yeah, Sriram, I want to share 2 things.
Sure.
Answering this. One is, if at all I would like to take something from Vedantham, his compassion towards the fellow human beings. 2, his anxiety to teach whoever wanted to learn.
Okay.
That is second. That I would consider as the best. But you have forgotten the most important thing. I took Kishore Chabria, who was then the managing director of Shaw Wallace, to Vedantham. It was the Chabria brothers dispute. So I introduced Kishore Chabria to him for the first time. He listened to him. And he listened to the case and he said, it is simple, leave it to Shankar, he will take care and I will do it. And then he asked him, where are you having your units, the liquor units? So he went on saying, and ultimately he said, there is one unit in Badgam and somewhere in Punjab. I told him, why did you go to Badgam? You should have gone to Solan. He asked him, why Solan? Then he told him that Solan Lake, the water's quality is something very interesting. He described the entire chemical properties, its requirement for making a good liquor, gave him how it should be prepared, everything. And he said, sir, I am the managing director of Shaw Wallace and I produce it. But he said, since you must know this art, I am telling you this is what you should do. Then Kishore Chabria asked him, sir, I came to you for a legal advice. He said, at the very first instance, it was given. Now, next is an unsolicited advice, take it, but always bring out a very good product. The third thing he said, it is a fight between you and your brother. The best thing is, you give me your brother's number, I will call him. I will tell him that he must give you something, fall at his feet, take your money and go. God did not create you to enrich lawyers. He did enrich lawyers and settle the matter on the same terms 10 years later.
Okay. Sir, Mr. Jia, would you like to add anything? Unmute. Onilya.
No, thinking on feet is one of these greatest qualities. Thinking on feet.
A lot of, from what I have heard, a lot of judges have been persuaded by the sheer speed of thinking on his feet.
Yes.
and he has got a lot of favorable orders.
Yes.
This
People used to say that he is like an auto. He can go anywhere, any street, anywhere. Unlike other lawyers, if they don't train, they will go in the same track. But he is like a bicycle auto. He can go anywhere and ultimately lead to a successful destination. He will take any route.
Sir, if there is one quality of GR Senior that you would like to emulate if you do not have it already, what is that?
His photographic memory.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I think that is one of the most important qualities for a lawyer. Absolutely, absolutely. So, gentlemen, thank you all for your time, and for all those watching. I'm really sorry that it has taken almost 3 hours. First of all, thanks to the 5 gentlemen here. I'm sure the 5 gentlemen above are looking down and nodding in approval as to the nice things that you've said about them. I'm sure Mr. GR Senior and Vedantham Srinivasan are looking down and wagging their finger. Why haven't you said enough? And what most people do not realize is that today's session was about an attorney general, a crown prosecutor, 2 advocate generals, 2 remarkable practitioners on the original side, and a law college lecturer, all comprised in these 5. And all these people were spoken about by an additional Solicitor General, a former additional Solicitor General, a former additional Advocate General, a consumer and a heritage activist, if I may call Mr. L Rajah that, and a judge. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank all of those who are watching, who've been here for almost a good 3 hours, because it's not a topic that is anything to do with the law per se. And therefore, at times, it must have been very, very tempting to leave the meeting and go. Thank you all very, very much. And thanks to the 5 of you for this wonderful trivia that you've given us about the kind of people your seniors were. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.